Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this reconvened Resources Extraordinary meeting. Was it only yesterday that we were mostly all here? So thank you everyone for joining us. I think we all know the safety information. So Joe, apologies, please.
Councillor McCowie has given his apologies from the Resources Scrutiny Commission, and Councillor Kent from the People's Scrutiny Commission. Is there another? Okay, Councillor Townsend is on her way, and there may be more People's Scrutiny Commission members arriving at 3:30 for the second part of the meeting.
Right. Declarations of interest. Oh yes, Leslie. Oh yes. Yep. Thank you, Leslie. Declarations of interest. I should declare that I am a trustee of the Friends of the Lord Mayor's Chapel, and I should also declare that, although not a pecuniary interest, my wife's brother is a special needs adult who receives support from the City Council, and that may, whilst not being individually relevant, may be an issue that gets raised under the People Directorate. Do any other members have any other interests? Leslie? Tim?
I'm chair of trustees of a care home association and charity, so some of the adult stuff is relevant.
Tim?
I have a special needs child, so similar to what you were saying.
Any others? Okay, thank you. So what I was just going to outline for those who weren't here yesterday, just to outline how we're going to work. So the first session, we are going to be dealing with the resources budget. That is allocated until 3:30, but I think given the significance of the people budget, I'm hoping that we may make our comments more succinct than yesterday and try and move on to people. And Joe is seeing if the officers from people might get here a little earlier, and particularly as Asha has managed to rearrange her diary so that we can be here and she can be with us. I'm keen that we do the people proposals as much justice as we can. So just to emphasise what these extraordinary meetings are being designed to look at the proposals that are being consulted on. So it's not specifically the budget, it's the consultation for savings. And it's simply a chance for members to raise questions on the proposals that were out there. If you have points you wish to raise as we go through the items, please catch my eye. And I will acknowledge if I see your hand, and if I don't acknowledge, then keep on waving until I do. And we will try and get through as many issues as we can. I will endeavour to take them in what looks like the order of priority based upon the magnitude of the proposed saving relative to the budget for that area. But if you have issues that you think are of particular import and you want to draw them to my attention and take them higher up the agenda, please do. The only other point, members, is that I don't read my emails during a meeting when I'm chairing, and therefore if you need to catch my attention, you will just have to wave or send me a written note and I will respond, but I won't respond to email. So item 5, public forum. We took statements yesterday, so there are no public forum items. So we go on to the budget consultation and the Resources Directorate. I've got a list of the proposals in front of me, and I have got the base budget that was approved at Council in March in front of me as well. And I think the resources savings from sections 1, 2 and 3 come to some £6.3 million plus £3 million for the council tax reduction scheme. Now, it strikes me, if I look at terms of priority and members' concerns, that the Section 2 proposal on the council tax reduction scheme is, I think, the most significant issue. And I wasn't being flippant, Craig, when I made the comment that when I saw that in the proposals, I realised that it was even more serious a financial situation than I thought it was. Do you want to comment on that proposal first before I open it to members for questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm happy to. I mean, as you'll know, it's been a red line for us throughout this. When we were in trouble in the past, we looked at it briefly, but as soon as we realised we had additional business rate income, we were able to pull back from a saving in previous years. We don't want to do this again. It's a saving for next year. It gives all of us the opportunity to work through how that might work and how we might, as a council, work a way of delivering something that is still helpful to citizens in a time when we just don't have the money to do what we've always done before. So it's something close to my heart personally. It's something I've kind of fought for and argued for a number of years, and to have to put it forward is, well, emotional, yeah. But we are where we are. This is not. It's our biggest area of non-discretionary spend still, and we just need to consider it.
Zoe, Martin. Yep, Zoe.
Hi, thanks, Craig. But at the moment it says it's talking about a potential cost reduction from a 10% flat rate reduction. So that's applying 10% across the board, not saying everybody would need to pay a minimum of 10%, or is that what it's saying?
Yeah, so it's saying the 10% will be the maximum, or sorry, the minimum you would have to pay, yeah.
That's what it's saying,
Yeah.
because it's not quite written like
But
that.
That said, we would have to, that's only a kind of, for instance, I think we need to consult the public formally on that proposal anyway, and we should, as a council, come together and discuss how we actually do this rather than it being something that we deliver.
Yeah, so the main people impacted would be the people that are on 100% reduction at the moment. Could you give us a list of what sort of people those are, like what benefits they're in receipt of, you know, pensioners, people working age having universal credit, whoever, what sort of people are impacted?
Yeah, we can do some of that information, yeah. So we can certainly give you the difference between, or how many are, so pensioners would get full relief anyway, regardless of the scheme, I think. So
because
so
that's a statutory government funded.
That's a statutory element. It's about 13,000, I think, of our total recipients.
And that, sorry, pensioners comes out of the central government pot, does it, rather than out of our pot?
Well, no, it comes out of the £40 million-ish that we pay. I mean, some good news is that we've seen a massive reduction in claimants in the past year, actually. I think we've gone down by 2,000 claimants of working age adults in the past year. Now we're probably going to see that rise again, I would have thought, as the recession starts to bite. But as it stands, that we are seeing that take-up of that reduce, if that helps at all.
Is Denise, were you indicating?
Yeah, I could just come in to just give a little bit of an overview. So in terms of the current scheme, the scheme at the moment cost approximately, or is forecast to cost approximately 42 million. 13 million of that is attributed to pension, or those claimants that are of pension age. That is a mandatory element, and that isn't subject to change, and the local authority has no remit in terms of the change of that. So whilst we administer that scheme, this proposal is only focusing on working age adults. So at the moment, the cost of those that are of working age adult is the remainder amount, which is 29 million. And presently we have just over 23,000 working age adults that are claiming. And of those, nearly 18,000 are receiving 100% council tax discount, which means at this stage they make no contribution. The proposal as outlined is sort of just giving an illustrative approach. So it sort of says actually there is an approach to have a more targeted scheme as opposed to just one that looks purely at income and income analysis. And more targeted, it means that actually there's an opportunity to think a little bit more about actually targeting it to either those with early years, children, disabilities, etc. So you can actually focus it a little bit more to get to those that need it. Or you could have an opportunity of just having a contribution from all, and that could range between 10-20%, and that would be in kilter with other schemes that are operating that are of a similar nature. So again, what we've modelled here is purely an illustration to say, let's just work on the assumption on a 10% flat rate. What would be the approximate saving? That would deliver about £3 million net of some increases in debt. Actually, if it was 20%, that doubles that nearly, not quite, because you have more debt. But that's sort of what's modelled. I think in terms of the information, Councillor Goodman, that you're asking for, I think Scrutiny have asked for that, and it will be going to the Resources Scrutiny Commission, which will give a breakdown by claimants based on benefit type, etc., and other things. So we have prepared that for a separate session, but it's not in here. But that's to look at the collection fund council tax base details coming through to Scrutiny.
Thanks. Yeah, so some of these working age adults will be in work, but some won't be. So you'll be providing that sort of detail next time, because obviously if they're not in work and wholly dependent on universal credit, the 10% will be coming out of their universal credit. There's been no other way of them funding that.
Yes, it will come from the income source that they have available to them. There won't be any other way of them funding that, but it will be a contribution of 10% from the income sources available to the relevant households.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a measure of how dire things are. If this is back in a sort of consultation, and we kind of challenged that when it was originally proposed a few years ago, and we've had briefings that suggested, even last year, that this is one of the simplest, best targeted, lowest cost ways of supporting people in the city. So it really is sort of worrying if cutting this support and the extra costs of managing any targeting within that will actually reduce the amount that we can spend on support for people. And if you combine that with the crisis prevention fund item in here, and even the reduction in relief for charity premises, you're really, this shows how, I mean, it's a desperate situation because it's undermining the support that's available when our support isn't available. And that's just so disturbing. So I hope we can find other ways to balance the budget, which is what we're legally meant to do. But it's just sort of so worrying that again this has come back, and now it's actually in a public consultation again.
Heather and then Mark.
Could you explain what the sort of equalities process from here would be? So assessing the different options, judging what impact it's going to have, who it's going to have, what that work would look like over the next year before any decision was made.
I'd probably have to defer to someone from equalities. Have we got anyone who can help with that? Tim, that used to be one.
So what I will say is that obviously we already capture and gather all of the information in terms of the groups and the claimants, etc. as well. This would require a full statutory consultation of 12 weeks, of which at that point we'd be getting the feedback, we'd do the full equalities impact, and at this stage this isn't designing the scheme, this is sort of saying actually this is an option. I think the point that was made earlier in terms of the nature of the items that are here, it's really just demonstrating the scale of the challenge. And we have to put forward the things that are discretionary for consideration. And as I'd sort of outlined previously, this is one of the areas of discretionary spend, and hence all of the ones that Councillor Fodder had mentioned are discretionary areas that maybe Bristol City Council are doing over and above other authorities. Hence they are here for consideration. They are only options at this stage and no decisions have been made, but we would be proposing that if this was taken forward, we would work through hopefully with a task and finish group in terms of what that scheme would look like, what a more targeted scheme would, how that could benefit, because actually we it does reach some of those that most need it, but there could be different ways of doing this. But it would be a full statutory consultation, and the implementation date would be 24-25, which gives a full year for planning, designing other schemes around the impact and how those that are deemed to be more vulnerable and disadvantaged would actually then be supported via other mechanisms.
Mark?
It's obviously a very painful thing to consider, and a number of us in the room have worked really hard over the years to keep this, both under previous administrations and obviously since. I just wanted to understand if this is something that does move towards the consultation phase, how we would look at the targeting. And I'm particularly interested in a kind of multi-agency approach. Is this just a accounts exercise, or would this involve the DWP and other agencies to try, get a good fit as to where the targeting might be? I'm obviously not advocating this, but I just want to understand how we might share data and have the best impact with the cut that is being considered.
So I think it's in our control, isn't it, to design that process however we want to design it. So we can spend some. Should this get to that point, then we can pull in whomever we want to have a conversation about how we target it better in the future, assuming that they'll join us in that conversation and that data sharing agreements can be made and all those things, which is not as easy as one would hope. Right?
So just in following up on that, because obviously there's a benefit, we do have the access to the DWP data, because the DWP data does feed into the analysis that we do, and actually this is part of the assessment as well in terms of sort of means testing. So a lot of that data will be there and available, and we can utilise that. The data is quite rich in terms of other authorities and other authority schemes. So again, all of that would come into the mix, and it would be for for members and yourselves to decide how you would want to target it should you decide to take this forward.
Anyone else on this? Tim and then John.
Thanks. Apologies, I think I should probably know this, but is the entire scheme discretionary, or is there a baseline that we have to provide? So if all discretionary funding was cut, would this entire scheme disappear?
It would. Well, apart from the pensioners, yes. So all working age adults would be removed. So if the commissioners came in, this would be the first thing they would take without consultation.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that though, Craig? Because from the presentations we've had in the past, that wouldn't produce £40 million on the bottom line. So what? So I think. Can you give us an indication just so that we can actually have that perspective of what...
Yeah, so I think, Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 13 million goes to pensioners, and then the remainder is working age adults. So it's the balance of 44 to 13.
But that would be unlikely to be all collected, even if the scheme was withdrawn.
Well, so if we look at the moment, we've seen a reduction in people eligible for council tax reduction, and we've also seen a drop in the number of people paying their council tax. So you could already draw that comparison, I suspect.
Yeah, sorry, Tim, did you want to come back?
No, I just think, it's worth reiterating that all of this money goes to the poorest people in the city, and to take this money away is all money that is going to have impacts in other areas that will almost certainly end up with us spending money that we don't have.
I mean, I agree, Tim, and we talked about this a bit yesterday. Everything we're doing at the moment feels like it's going to have a cost in the future, and this is the problem with national thinking, that it appears to not understand the system, and that if you fail to spend here, the cost pops up somewhere else, and sometimes more. And things like this are exactly one of these cases, aren't they? Well, we could cut the funding here, it's going to pop up all over the place probably.
John.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, other local authorities obviously do charge a small amount, like the 10% level. Are we confident that we would be able to get that some net of bad debt in? Because obviously if people have got very little to pay, I mean, can they even afford the 10%?
No, I don't think we would be. John, as I just said, I mean, if we look at the drop in eligibility this year and the rise in the drop in our collection rate, you could probably draw some conclusions there. There's no evidence to prove that either way, but I would say that the two are probably connected. So I suspect No.
Right, thank you. So just to recap, Denise, what you were saying, that this has to be consulted on specifically in post the budget and approved for it to be included in the 24-25 figures.
Yes, so it would need to be consulted on during the course of the next financial year, with it's finalised or approved prior to the next budget setting round, because it forms part of the council tax base for the subsequent year. So if it was going to go forward as a proposition, then full council would need to approve it to go forward for consultation in 23-24. And therefore we'd take the summer to do a full 12-week consultation, and then it feeds into all of the collection fund and council tax base reports that are produced in the autumn of next year.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, Tim.
I'm just wondering if I could ask one more question. Is there anywhere where we can see which other authorities have the schemes that benefit people the most, and which ones have the least, and whether there's a correlation between those and deprivation in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, we would usually provide even in the kind of keep it as it is documents that we put out most years. We usually give a summary of the other local authorities' positions. So usually core cities, so we're not Birmingham, Liverpool, those sorts of things. So comparable levels of deprivation, but do have a scheme that charges. Yeah, we can enhance that through for me, this feels like something that a scrutiny task and finish group would be best placed to look at and really get into all of the potential options before presenting anything to full council.
Yeah, Asha.
Yesterday we had a couple of councillors who were doing a review of our corporate parenting panel, and the lead inspector was my equivalent from Leicester, and I was having the very difficult conversations that you have when you and they are in a similar position. So if you are going to have a scrutiny task and finish group, I'd also suggest you look at Leicester City Council and see what proposals that they are putting together around their council tax reduction scheme. They're in the same boat as we are.
Thank you, Asha.
Can I just come in?
Yeah,
so just on a final point, in terms of comparators with those authorities that maybe have the lower collection rates, they're generally core cities that tend to fare probably or don't collect as much. They all have a scheme in place that requires a contribution. I've got Sheffield has a 23% contribution, Nottingham 15, Coventry, etc. So they all have a contribution to the scheme, etc. But similarly, our collection rates are in line with theirs. In fact, in some areas they're doing slightly better than us at the moment. So again, it isn't necessarily a like-for-like comparator, so it is something to think about. We are in the few that still have a 100% scheme, but we have got the details of all the comparator authorities, those that have banded schemes, flat rate schemes, etc. as well. So that data is collected and we have that available and can share that. I think I'll probably just reiterate the point that this is £29 million of discretionary spend, and we do need to look at it in the context of some of the other challenges that we do have as well in other areas of the Directorate that are equally as challenging and are equally protecting the most vulnerable.
Thank you, Denise. Craig, I think it's fair to say, but you know the view of members and you agree with the view of members. So it's not a question of us telling you that. But it's purely to say, I'm sure I speak on behalf of Resources members, that we would reluctantly but willingly work in a task and finish group to help make sure that what's put forward is as positive as it can be in the circumstances. So hopefully we can discuss that post the budget process. Members, I suggest that we move now to items. Oh, yeah, Martin.
Could I just say something? Just to follow on from that, I really welcome the fact we're talking now about, you know, a collaborative approach and working cross-party and potentially with other input from other stakeholders or exemplars and so on. That's really helpful, and that's the first time this has come up so far in this meeting, half of which was yesterday, obviously, and it's the first time we've had. I just feel it's significant. This is the first time we've had something even reasonably specific to discuss that hasn't said we're just going to review this or we have to make savings and it has to be done this first year, because we're actually agreeing we have time to consider this, to look at something specific that we talked about, 10%, 20%, what kind of approach there is. And that's really helpful, but an awful lot of the discussions yesterday were saying there probably isn't a strategy already, and there probably isn't a clear proposal, and that made it a lot harder to input. So I'm just glad we've got the chance to do that on this particular item, because it is more specific, and you know, we're trying to find solutions because we agree there should be better funding, but this is what we're faced with.
Thank you, Martin. So if we move on to R29 and R30, which is both discretionary rate relief on page 5, and I think, Heather, you wanted to speak on this and link R21 on page 6, which is the local crisis prevention fund as well. So do you want to just...
Yeah, I was just wondering whether it might help us if you give us a list of the order that you're going to take items in, and then we'll be aware what are coming up, and then people will be ready to speak on them, but also knowing how much time we've got left as we're going through them.
Well, I can give you an indication. What I was going to suggest was that after this, we looked at a combination of restructuring savings across a series of resources budgets, and I was separately going to raise questions about Executive Office and Mayor's Office savings as well. So I was going to take those, and then I was going to, if we have any time left, see whether members have other topics that they wish to raise from the other savings.
Thanks. And what numbers Heather's on, sorry?
So this is R29 and R30, which is discretionary rate relief on page 5, and the crisis fund on page 6. And well done, Zoe, because that's given her the time to find her notes. So that was really thoughtful of you.
Okay. In terms of discretionary rate relief, I think the question was just about whether we're putting a lot of pressure on some small charities and small organisations that we're signposting to provide services, and at the same time, are we going to take away the discretionary rate relief, and how do we think that's going to work in terms of the support they offer us?
Well, probably the simplistic answer is yes, probably. We need to do that analysis on some more of the detail on the organisations directly impacted. Some of them are national, so the problem is kind of not as big as it would be if it's a small local organisation facing that kind of cut. But yes, this is not, again, is another thing that we wouldn't be doing. And in fact, we talked about this once before and pulled back from making any savings in this area because we believe it's our role to support charities in the city, but we can't afford it anymore, or we can't at this moment in time. So we've got to decide, are we going to lop even more out of our social care budgets, or are we going to have to take things from other discretionary spend? This is one of those examples. So yes, so no is the answer. We need to do some analysis on it, but I suspect there will be an impact, yes.
Anybody else? No? Okay, in that case, if I move on first of all to R6 and R7, which is in section 3, and that is the Executive Office and the Mayor's Office, and I'm raising that now in part with Helen here as well in her position as chair of the committee working group. But Craig, the real reason I want to ask questions about those two is that I think it's fair to say, Helen, the working group recognises that it can't come back with proposals that are going to cost more to run a committee system than a mayoral system. It recognises that completely, but it's also a recognition that there are going to be pressures on organisation in terms of the need for officer support for the committees and the roles of committee chairs, which themselves are going to be pretty pressured responsibilities. So I must admit, having suggested in the committee that I didn't believe the budget was going to be reduced, but it would have to be redeployed, I'm concerned to then say savings coming through and thinking that it could make establishing the committee system more difficult. Helen, can I just ask, have I reflected in those comments fair? I'm trying to be fair and impartial rather than any partisan picture. Is that a reasonable comments for me to have made?
I think you've reflected it accurately, and I think it's something that we're still getting our heads round. And I think that it's irresponsible for members to say we need to design a system irrespective of what that's going to cost, given the situation that we're in. But we heard a message very clearly from Sheffield City Council particularly about the additional cost to democratic services. I mean, it's just also worth throwing in that Jenny Bartle and I are meeting with the Independent Remuneration Panel, who are starting to look at their recommendations to the council in due course. And I'm sure that they also are looking at a total cost, if you're looking at special responsibility allowances for chairs, vice chairs and so on, that they're looking at containing that cost as well.
So, I mean, I could be cynical and political and say that year after year, your party, the Green Party and the Lib Dems have said, let's cut the fat and bloated, and I quote, Mayor's office, and that democracy shouldn't be costing us this much money. Now you're going to have to run it yourself. Suddenly you want exactly the same amount of money that it cost before. I won't do that though. I will. So this is about rebaselining it. This is about rebaselining the budgets, really, isn't it? So we need to be able to say the Mayor's office used to cost this. Committee system is going to cost this. Next year there'll be a pressure in the budget and it'll be the cost of the committee system. We have no idea what that is at the moment at all, do we? We've not got any structures designed. We don't know what the remuneration of committee members will be. We have no sight at all of what any of that cost will be. So at the moment we've got a rebaseline of the budget, which is to take the cost of the Mayor's office out, and next year we'll have a pressure coming in, which will be the cost of the committee system that we'll need to redesign or be designed.
I mean, all I would say, Craig, is that the eloquence with which you argued the case over the years has left me convinced that we need a budget of that size. But that, I hear what you say, and I'm really just flagging up a concern that we actually need the model to work, and it's just a plea that constraining it by reducing funds for the things that will need to make it work in the first year could be disadvantageous. But I'm actually saying, so don't be too hard on me, that I'm supporting the view that we mustn't see that growing further. And I have argued with others that it would be unacceptable for us to put forward anything that was going to cost more. That's as far as it's gone so far. But I understand there needs to be savings, but I'm just flagging up that it also needs to be realistic in what is proposed. And you know that if you consult the public on those two issues, the public will say, yes, great idea, cut it. But actually, they don't know what the impact is of cutting something that won't be there in 2 years' time and will be something different, and it may make that something different not function.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I suppose the point here, we're talking about people in the end, aren't we? So the Mayor's office is a team of people that do work to support the Mayor, monitoring mailboxes, working on policy and so on. Those roles, will they exist in the new system? We don't know yet, do we? And we don't know will they be comparable? Will they be, transferable? Are they transferable skills? So for me, this is just about clearing the current system out and a new one needing to be designed and the cost of that needing to be factored into future budgets. It isn't, the big change is next year and could be completely revised between now and then anyway.
So I was too engaged in that discussion to see the hands came up in. So Helen, Martin, Tim and John.
It's Heather. Helen's over there. We have looked at the Mayor's office, year after year for the Green Party, and we got a very persuasive story about what was happening in the Mayor's office. And although it looked as though the Mayor's office had grown a lot in terms of staff and money, that it was actually comms teams and other teams moving into the Mayor's office, and that the staff within the Mayor's office were essential. So that's why we didn't put in proposals to take all of this money out of the Mayor's office. So I guess I want to understand, I know that it's not just people dealing with the Mayor's correspondence, it is people doing the communications for the city that now happen to sit within the Mayor's office. So what is it that would be lost with this amount of money? What are the roles, what are the tasks that are being done?
I mean, we could give you exactly that detail. And of course, we've got a year to work that through anyway, because the big saving's not till next year. But I mean, what the balancing act that we actually did was between the exec office and the Mayor's office. So previously, the executive office was much bigger, and the Mayor's office was one member of staff. To be honest, all we did was kind of rejig that overall budget to have a political leadership, because that's what we felt the council needed after years of not really having that. So actually, the two savings being together is actually more interesting than it's probably been picked up on, because the exec office is already reduced in size to support the Mayor's office, and now that's happening. Anyway, we can give you that detail if you need it. We've got a year anyway to get through that process, and maybe when we've got a new committee system, there'll be a whole raft of different jobs, but they'll probably sit in democratic services or somewhere different than the Mayor's office anyway, and there'll be different roles.
Martin?
Yeah, thank you. Following on that, looking at this group of proposals for which it says no consultation is required, it includes member development, cut in the coming year, but that cut remains all following years, which is when there'll be a complete refresh of the council through all-out elections. So there could be a lot of member development needed to make an effective council. The executive office cut in this first year. The Mayor's office primarily cut the final year primarily cut when the changeover occurs, and then also cuts to legal and democratic services, which is when the new committee system will also need support of democratic services. Saying you're clearing out the costs could be reframed as saying there's a bit of a scorched earth sort of approach being taken to clear it all out and not leave something there, because it doesn't show any increase being considered, even considered by this administration for the years when there is a new system needing to be put in place and got up and running and to work effectively for the people of the city. And yes, we said yesterday that back office functions are a bit easier to cut than public facing services. But if we don't have support for an incoming new council, new committee system, and all the democratic arrangements around that, then to me that's really disturbing that we haven't even been asked what's needed for that year 24-25 yet. We've just been told, oh, that's to be decided somewhere else. So the proposals from this administration is basically cutting away, what support will be available for whatever administration comes in. And that's disturbing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a fair reflection of what's happening, actually. So in terms of member development, if you look, effectively we're cutting the training budget. So member development and learning and development, which is the officer equivalent, we're cutting both those budgets because it's non-discretionary spend and it's better than cutting adult social care. Legal and democratic services have taken cuts year on year on year because it's one of those areas that is easier to cut than adult social care and other bits. Similarly, you'll see HR and finance are in there too for the exactly same reasons, and they're not functioning in a brilliant, in a way that's filled with fat that we can trim. Those departments are struggling because we don't have enough staff today. I'm going to take more out, and we're going to have to because we can't afford the increasing cost of social care. And that is a stark reality. It does mean that lots of really difficult decisions are being made, but of course the back office is going to be the first place we go for a lot of these things, and has been throughout our time here. And we'll, up and down the land is what is happening. And I don't know what the solution is other than more money for social care. It's certainly not a political clear out of the support for the committee system, because of course we'll be members of the committee system too, or some of us will be, so it's not in our interest to do that to ourselves or you or anyone else. Yeah.
Tim, and then I'll take John and Zoe.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to clarify this in my own mind. So you've got the Mayor's office, but there are also cabinet salaries, which presumably are separate from the Mayor's office, but those salaries will go, and then there will be equivalent salaries for committee members. So
yeah,
it's not,
absolutely.
the Mayor's office isn't the totality of the money that could be used to support the committee system.
Oh no, absolutely not. No, it's not the SRAs for members, cabinet members, committee chairs, and the Mayor himself. No, it's not that. That's a separate budget. Yeah.
Chair, may I come and make a couple of comments, please? Just if it helps. That's fine. Just for clarity, if I pick up Councillor Rippington's last question, cabinet member allowances are paid for out of our members' allowances budget, which is a separate budget which sits in democratic engagement. Democratic engagement covers more than just committee clerks supporting committees. We have member support officers, we have the Lord Mayor's office, we have political assistants, we have the democratic services and the scrutiny functions. So when we're talking about reviewing the structures, there's a lot of things that are in the mix, not just the support that are for committees. This is about how we restructure our services to be an efficient organisation. I think Craig has covered the questions around member development. That is aligned with what we're doing, and more generally with the staffing development budgets. There's one other point I wanted to just make sure members were clear about. There's been a lot of discussion about the Mayor's office budget, but the second proposal that the chair raised was regarding the executive office. That is very much a different budget. It's about the administrative support that is provided to directors like myself and colleagues here, which that there is a reasonable amount of fat that we can certainly go at and ensure that directors receive the right level of support, rather than perhaps what is in most cases one-to-one support at the moment. So I wouldn't want members to think that was something aligned with the Mayor's office. That is about being an efficient council, but having the right resources and the right support to senior management, very separate to the proposals around the Mayor's office. I hope that's helpful, Craig, just to provide some clarity there.
Thank you, Tim. John.
Thanks, Chair. I sort of get that you have to put that the Mayor's office money is disappearing because the Mayor's office is closing, but somewhere there's going to be a cost arising from the new committee system, so probably somewhere we need to reflect perhaps the net figure, but I don't want to have a big debate about that because other people have argued about it. What caught my eye is just the line underneath, which is a £900,000 saving, which is a big sum of money in legal and democratic services. It just says reduce the cost of legal and democratic services. I'm not quite sure how you're going to do it. Could you sort of tell us a little bit more about it?
So this is one of a number of proposals, and perhaps this was on your the next item on your list, Chair. But certainly from the legal and democratic services perspective, we are very staff heavy, and this is about doing things in a more efficient way. Stopping doing things which are not appropriate for us to be doing in these service teams, but also recognising that there are core services that we need to deliver, but delivering them in a way that is most efficient for what the council wants to be as a smaller organisation. There are a number of proposals that we've got for legal and democratic services, which look at third-party spend on things like locums and external legal support, for instance. There's also a vacancy freeze in place, which is enabling us to look at the structures and where vacant posts come up. So a lot of things are being looked at in the round, which I'm looking at, and my colleagues here are doing similar things. So there's quite a lot of options that we've got in the pipeline to look at there.
Thanks, Chair. And I know you're going to take us through a bit more of a discussion about some of those structural points in due course. But there is there is something on the back of Tim's comments around the organisation that we need to be going forward. And we've all discussed over many years that the council does too many things. It certainly does too many things for the available funding. We need to become more focused and more streamlined. We talk about becoming a development organisation. It's in our corporate strategy. Frankly, our progress towards that has been patchy. The thing we can do first is we can do something to our support services that gets them, in effect, ahead of that. So you might have services out there in the public-facing domain where it's going to take you maybe a year, 2 years to achieve the change. Internally, we can move much faster. What that means is that the machine, the organisation, will feel a bit starved of resource. Actually, that's the kind of pressure we're going to need to force the change out there. Otherwise, we'll sit there with a lot of resources tied up in back office doing things that we've said as an organisation we shouldn't be doing. So I think it's a sensible thing to do, to start to become a leaner support organisation, slightly ahead of, in some cases, the changes that we need to make on the front line, by which I don't mean actual front line. I mean the way we deliver frontline services, which we have to simplify, and we have to become more around commissioning and develop and enabling others to deliver, because that's what we've been talking about for 4 years.
Tim, is it on this topic, or is it? Yeah. Okay, I'll take you and then Zoe.
I was just wondering what the risks are in terms of cutting legal services, in terms of things that we might miss as a result of having less legal staff and could cost us large amounts of money further down the line. I appreciate, comments like trimming the fat are designed to give a positive spin on this, but actually we all know that the council's been trimming fat for as long as it's possible to trim fat, and so I'm pretty sure that most of these people do a good job and are there for a particular reason, and if we cut some of them, are we going to be running a significant risk?
I mean, the quick answer is that it will be an increased risk, but we just have to be clever about, or thoughtful about, intentional about where we do it, and make sure that that risk is kept to or mitigated as best as it can be. But true of any of the back office changes we've had to make over X number of years. You remove finance officers, there is a risk to that. You remove lawyers, there is. You remove HR support, there is.
Zoe,
may I come in on that just very briefly? I think it's important as the council's monitoring officer that I have appropriate resources at my disposal. The changes that have been proposed are across the whole of legal and democratic services, of which legal services is probably about 20% of the staffing budget. That yes, there will be changes in that area, but I'm satisfied that there will still be more than sufficient resource to enable me to seek advice appropriately on the legal matters and legal risks that the council.
Zoe.
Hi, yeah, I wanted to go back to our 4.1 member development. As we pointed out, there's going to be an influx of a lot of new councillors with councillors stepping down, but also under the committee system, a lot of those councillors will need to be taking on significant responsibility as part of the committee system. Rather than a scrutiny role, it'll be statutory roles that they'll be responsible for. So I can see that it's an easy thing to cut. It looks like just training members, but in terms of members, particularly new ones, understanding, and as on scrutiny that don't know, obviously a lot of things that happen in cabinet, how will we make sure that there is sufficient budget to train people up to be aware of their statutory responsibilities and getting things right?
Yeah, I mean, the theory behind the saving actually is to make sure that we're maximising the use of things like the LGA and other bodies to which we pay subscription fees, and to which there are training programs that we don't necessarily use as well as we could, and we pay for things and do things ourselves that we could probably get out of our subscriptions that we pay elsewhere. So it's about being clever, particularly when it comes to the new committee system, because we've got no one here who's experienced it in terms of officer base. So we've got no one here who will have any experience of the committee system in an officer base. So we will need to be bringing in that experience anyway, that expertise anyway. So organisations like the LGA, who will have supported Sheffield and others in moving to committee systems or away from committee systems will be better placed to help us anyway. Well, we pay a subscription to them anyway, so yes, in fact, well, we pay for it in a range.
David, and that will be the last one on this topic.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm interested in the idea of actually cutting democratic services when we do move to a committee system, because I don't know whether this is speaking out of hand, but I think we decided to go for a committee system because it was more democratic and more transparent, and we want actually to be accountable to our electorate, so that will mean more meetings that are webcast, more votes that are recorded, all that sort of stuff that democratic services does, we will need more of, and having less people to do it will not help us.
I said difficult decisions have to be made. That's why these are here. These are our decisions that we need to make. And the point that Craig had made about year after year after year, you telling us that we needed to trim our own fat in terms of mayor and democratic services. And this is the point. We're now, where are we? We're in November. We still have no idea. You still have no idea what committee system. So we can't put a finger in the air and say this is how much it's going to cost. You're going to have to tell us how much it's going to cost, because we don't know what system you're going to put in place. And so all we can do is cut what's not going to be in existence from the end of 2024-25. But I don't know, how long is a piece of string? When are we going to know what kind of committee system and what the price is going to be paid for that committee system? But something has to give, and we're doing everything we can to try and protect the most vulnerable. But the most difficult, it's been so difficult for all of us as cabinet members, having to take red lines across everything that we have been precious about for the last 6.5 years, okay? But our back is against the wall. Government, I can blame whoever you want to blame, but we are where we are, and so everything was on the table. There is no mischief making, there's no politicizing. This has been tough for us and for the staff that we've had to have the conversations with about the potential for what's happening. So, until you make a decision, we don't know.
Can I just interrupt, Asha? David, we've sort of morphed into the items on each of the 6 restructuring items, and you mentioned to me you had concern about the IT service. So before we close out on resources, do you just want to raise your concerns?
Yes,
there?
thank you, Chair. So I'm concerned that we're looking to try and save money in IT. We've got various internal audit issues where IT has been found with limited assurance ratings, and cutting the numbers of staff and its resources to actually deliver a functional IT system for Bristol City Council, the glue that makes everything work, is not going to be a helpful process. So I would like to understand the rationale for even doing this, please.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure Tim can probably come in with some of the details on it. I mean, as the resources cabinet member, I guess I think cuts to all of these services aren't great. I think it will affect our ability to operate as well as we do now, which is not even where we would want to be operating a lot of the time in a lot of parts of the organisation. There are things that we can do that are better though, and the IT service is one where we've been on a journey for, I don't know how many years now, 4 years since the future state assessment was done, where we knew that we were investing in infrastructure that would kind of require us to have more staff for a period of time, and then that would tail off as that infrastructure was able to deliver more of or automate things that humans are currently doing, for example. So there was always a view that there would be a wave in cost in IT. So we are kind of riding that wave. It's not perfect. I agree with you, but it is where we are. I don't know, Tim, if you want to come in with some specifics.
Yeah, I will limit myself on some of the specifics because we're still working on the structural proposals and have not yet started consultation with staff. So I don't want to speak about particular staff groups today. but we'll be happy to pick that up and make that available when it's there. Just in terms of some of the detail behind this, though, the division across several departments has about 144 full-time staff and a salary bill of about 5.4 million. So it's set within that context. We're currently benchmarking against other major authorities and cities, and to have a staffing base of around 100 seems to be pretty appropriate compared to other major authorities. So it does suggest that there is things to look at there. Again, without getting into specifics of teams, a lot of the work we've been doing in the digital transformation that Councillor Cheney referred to has been things like bringing in simpler systems that work out of the box, that we need to do less bespoking of, less of the sort of on-site maintenance of as well, in the move to the cloud. So there are roles that, as we finish this transition, may not be ones we'd need so many of in future. That said, some of that is still continuing in the digital transformation programme. This is bringing forward an end state, and that's not without risk. The key mitigation for that is that we are due to contract a digital strategic partner to provide some additional capacity on a zero commitment basis, but be available to us across all IT and digital disciplines. It would be right to say that that can be more expensive if it was brought in on sort of permanent full-time basis, but this is a co-sourcing model to deliver specific projects where we see very much shorter-term task and finish of particular skills rather than retaining all of the in-house capacity we do. So there is some risk there. We are working through the structure, and if we find, as we do that we cannot achieve this number safely, then I will be looking for alternatives and substitutes for that saving. So I would say we're at that proposal stage. Just finally, to pick up on your comments around audits, I know we've discussed the audit committee. Again, without getting ahead of myself in the structure, we are looking at the strategy and policy side of IT very closely. We're currently recruiting a head of digital strategy and transformation following a restructure of the management team here. And I am looking to try and move some of the remaining capacity that we'd have into some additional roles around policy, assurance, security architecture, to make sure that that side of the business and the contracting side of the business and the value we can drive from there is appropriately supported. It's a very tricky balancing act. It's a live piece of work, but very happy to share the detail when we have it.
Can I just sense comment on that? And I hope I'm not saying anything that you need to respond to or that you're going to disagree with, but we've seen over the years, sadly, a number of programmes of voluntary redundancies where we sometimes see some extremely good people go and leave vacancies or gaps which mean we've lost a lot of our corporate sort of history and knowledge of the organisation. I understand when you're going through a change programme that it doesn't have to be that you always do things the way they've always been done, but sometimes that corporate history is really valuable. And the other bit that I understand, again, the financial pressure that's caused a recruitment freeze, but not recruiting into jobs just because they've gone vacant is itself a problem that could be detrimental to the organisation. So it's really just a plea that we do make sure that what we're doing is appropriate and fit for purpose rather than needed in order to balance the books, because the costs of going down that route will actually be far greater if it's not managed. I'm sure you're going to assure me it is, but I can't help but make those comments listening to the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, so a few things. So on the vacancy freeze, there is a process for averting that, as it were. So if a role is considered, it's going to cost us more money by holding the vacancy open, then you can go for a panel and have your vacancy approved and recruit to it. So there is a process for avoiding that exact issue just outlined, because there is a real risk that we cost ourselves more money by just holding vacancies open. At the same time, obviously, that needs to be a robust process, because everyone can argue that their job's absolutely essential, of course, and we are in dire straits financially, so that's why we're doing it. In terms of voluntary redundancy programs, yeah, I mean, the problem with any voluntary redundancy program is quite often the ones that have got an element of get up and go forward for the voluntary redundancy programme first, and so that can be problematic. So you have to be careful about who you accept and who you don't. And there'll be processes for that, but you know that's how it will work and how it has worked in the past.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to come in on the final point, just in terms of really just understanding the scale of the challenge and recognising that at least 70% of the pressures that we are exposed to at the moment are aligned to the People Directorate. But actually it means that all of us, we all own this. It's about collective leadership, collective ownership, and so therefore we need to look across the organisation for areas to make efficiencies. So within resources, the majority of the budget within resources will be staffing related budgets and staffing related areas. So therefore it's impossible for it to be exempt with, so therefore we have had to look at this. But clearly what we need to also consider is that what you're seeing here is the divisional lines. There are a number of areas on each of those divisions, and they're not all of these statutory areas that you would think of. But we as statutory officers, myself, Tim and other statutory officers, need to ensure that the service that we design is safe and that we are able to meet all of our regulatory requirements as part of that, and ensure that we don't expose the council to any unnecessary risk. So when we look at our structures and look at the efficiencies that need to flow from that, that's the first thing that's paramount in our mind in terms of what the structures that are designed, because we need to ensure that we're able to deliver against our statutory responsibilities. So our restructures will be focusing on that, but actually delivering that along with the business needs is going to be paramount. So, we will be mindful of that, and myself, like all of the other statutory officers, will ensure that the council remains safe and that we're not exposed to any unnecessary risk as part of our journey to our leaner organisation.
And just to build on what Denise finished with it's really important that we understand what that journey towards a lean organisation looks like. So you're right, obviously, when you're up against it and events are happening in the real world faster than you can respond, you're always on the back foot. And some areas of the council have felt like that for some time. We have got to get ahead of that and describe the organisation that we think we can afford to be for whoever is in the administration, so that the council is also on a sustainable footing for the environment we're really in and are likely to be in for some time to come. So we've got to go beyond simply building ourselves headroom to achieve a balanced budget. In some cases at the moment, that is by holding off on recruitment. It's true, and that is having an effect, not on our safety or legality of any of things we do, but on some of the discretionary areas that we would very much like to do. We are holding back, and it is massively suboptimal. So what we need to do in parallel is work on a future state model that gives us a chance of having an organisation that's a high-performing organisation.
I'm going to take Lorraine and then Tim, and then I'm going to move on to People Directorate at that point. So, Lorraine?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up something. Sorry, I'm blind as a bat and I got the wrong glasses on. But what you just said about safety, that the council is functioning safely. And I'm wondering when that equalities impact statement would be available, because I think that's really a really good benchmark, isn't it? That do we know what safe looks like? So then it kind of guides the overall process, isn't it? So you kind of, I'm sure you're the one that's got the expertise when it comes to budgets, but I'm just wondering where that equalities impact assessment is so that we know what safe is. Thank you.
Yeah. So at this stage, the proposals are still at consultation stage, but when we actually do the full redesigns of our services, we will need to do an equalities impact assessment as part of that. When you actually come to make the budget decisions, you'll have a cumulative impact assessment that brings together all of the propositions and looks at these in the round. But the point that I wanted to make as a statutory officer is that actually I've also got a whole range of benchmarks that I need to ensure that we are able to deliver, and I have to be able to do a self-assessment against all of that, and I have to take that report to audit committee, etc. as well, to explain and double check that everything that we are required to do, I am able to do and have sufficient resources to do that. So that compliance and our compliance as a council is a formal part of the report, and it is also something that our external auditors will look at if they felt that we were too lean and weren't safe. So we have got some checks and balances as part of this process, and that will all be reported as well in due course. So that's one of the key points.
Tim.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on Stephen's point about the size of council that we can afford to be, and just make the point that the size of council we can afford to be and the size of council that we think we should be are two very different things, and that one of them is a political, well, they're both driven politically by the amount of funding we're given. But obviously we're at a point where we are trying to shrink the council to fit our funding, but that is not necessarily something that everybody thinks that the council should be. It's just a reality at the present time, and that could change as things change politically over time.
I mean, I absolutely agree. But what was very clear, for example, from the autumn statement is that any commitments made were for a 2-year duration. I think it was very clearly a can being kicked down the road. So we can hope for the best, or we can prepare ourselves to be a resilient, sustainable organisation. So it is, you've heard cabinet members today describe the very difficult choices they are having to make in terms of recommendations and proposals. As officers, our job is to ensure that we deliver a balanced budget through the statutory officers, and in my case, that we marshal the resources and we organise ourselves as effectively as we can be to deliver the programme of whoever's in the administration and our statutory duties, but within an available funding envelope. At the moment, it's very, very clear, and it has been clear for a number of years, the direction of travel isn't positive for local government, and I just think we have to be realistic. And I think we've kept hold of some aspects of this authority for a very long time. Other authorities have had to move on. None of them presumably would have wanted to, but everybody at certain points in the last 12 years has had to face facts, and we face some of those in this chamber, no doubt you will have done, and I think we're just in the next iteration of that, so we're just trying to be realistic.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree that you have to fit the model to what is available, but what I just don't want to do is confuse the two and say that because that's what's available, that's what we think the council should be, going forward.
Absolutely. At the same time, however, we have to offer hope to our staff and a sense of what we might be creating here. So there's a dual issue. Recognising your point entirely, we have to find something other than a narrative that it's backs to the wall, and it's another cup being rained down on us from above. So what I'm trying to do is say we need to remind people of the underlying purpose of what it is to work for a council, and give people a real sense of optimism and hope despite everything. And that's a real challenge, but that's what I think we all, as members of our leadership team, we all want to do.
Right, members, I don't want to stifle debate, but I have to say that this is one of the most extraordinary parts of a budget consultation process that I've been involved with, because I think we're all in agreement with the cabinet views that are being expressed as well, and we could carry on discussing this, but we aren't going to help solve an insoluble problem. So I propose that we move on to People Directorate, but I do make the comment that I made yesterday: if there are items we've not answered or dealt with because we're moving on, please send your questions into Jo, and I'm sure Denise and her team will very happily answer them. I think, taking Tim and Stephen's last comments, one of the areas that concerns me, we've talked for some years about the direction of travel as such that the council will end up only providing people services over a period of time if we carry on in this direction. And I am wondering whether at some stage, not as part of the budget process for this year, but whether resources or scrutiny as a whole couldn't actually have a discussion with cabinet members about what that would look like and how we maintain some non-people services as part of the core offer of the authority, so that we are engaging with citizens across the city. That's a personal view, but it's just something that I feel we need to have that discussion at some stage before we end up by default finding ourselves in a situation that maybe no one's quite intended to come about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. And there is, to come to sort of to Stephen's point, there is an opportunity, I suppose, to rethink the whole structures of the council from the bottom up, rather than continuing to look at what we've got and take bits off of it, which is what we've done for a number of years. Of course, that's very complicated, very big. Well, it's a very difficult task. But yes, that is the opportunity. The risk, though, is, of course, that if we don't get more money, it doesn't matter. The cost of social care is going to outstrip everything else unless we take... Well, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. It will continue to outstrip everything else, and until such time as we get money to pay for it, that's
yeah,
where we are.
Indeed.
Yeah.
But the offer for that discussion post the budget process, if it can be done in some format, I think is a discussion that needs to happen before it's brought about through necessity. So we move on. Can I just? I'm not going to let Denise go, but can I thank the rest of the resources team and say, whilst we'd love you to stay, we fully understand that you have more productive things to do. So thank you for your time. And we move on. Yeah. Thank you, Craig. And we move on to People Directorate. If you want to move forward a row so that you're not quite as removed for us, you would be very welcome. And Hugh, I'm going to apologise for my ignorance and say, could you introduce me and possibly other members to your team, because I'm not familiar with them all. And while they're adjusting, members, following on from Zoe's question of the order, I have concluded that the best way is to go through this in order of Section 1, Section 2 and Section 3, unless members of the People Scrutiny Commission have a particular priority. Tim. Oh, right. Okay. Yep. Well. So yeah, I'll come to you then before we take the other points. Christine, do you have any particular? I know. Sorry. Better at the end. If you're relying on my chairing skills to get you plenty of time at the end, then you might be poorly disappointed. But Christine, I don't know whether you and other members of the People Commission have any other priorities, or are you happy if we go through and...
Yeah, I'm happy to go through in the order in which they're written in. Councillor Kent has sent his apologies. Yeah, you're aware.
We noted those, and we knew you were going to join us a few minutes later, but yes, we're aware of that. So obviously the whole purpose of this is for resources members to have the chance to hear from the Service Commission members on the potential impacts on the service of the proposals. So therefore, we very much welcome your contribution as we go through those items. So Hugh, would you just like to introduce us, please?
Thank you, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce to you Stephen Beat, who's the Director of Adult Services, Fiona Tudge, who's our Director of Children's Services, Richard Hanks, who's our Director of Education, and I'm sure you know Christina Gray, who's our Director of Public Health. That's the team.
Right. Thank you, Hugh, and welcome to Cabinet members as well. And we, I think, need to look, and I just need to sort out my papers, and I think we will aim, if members are happy, I think we aim to stick with one part of the service before we move on to the other, rather than flip between the two on the grounds that I will otherwise get even more confused. Does that seem a reasonable approach? So I looked at the proposed savings that we were consulting on, and Denise may correct me, or Hugh may correct me, but it seemed that in children's services we had savings that I think amounted to about £19 million out of a total of 65 million, whereas in adult services we have a savings of 7.7 million out of a total of 165 million. So I'm just setting those, that was my interpretation of the parameters, and I think therefore on that basis that whilst the figures are huge in both services, that we should probably start with children's services first. So and if we go through the issues, P11 is foster care recruitment and P12 specialist foster care, and that was 1.5 million and 3.4 million. Have to speak on those to start with?
Yeah, in fact, I might, in the interest of time, almost link some questions for P11, P12 and P26, which is Homes for Complex Needs. And this really comes, I'm on the Corporate Parenting Board, have a very specific interest in this area. And really my questions are just about the feasibility and what are the actions to get these savings on all of them. So within foster care recruitment, I know there's been a lot of work done over the last couple of years in terms of foster care recruitment. I really welcome the increase in fees, but I guess I want to hear what are we doing? Why do we predict that we're suddenly going to recruit a lot more foster carers over the next couple of years than we have been? Is there anything that we can change? Is there anything that we're doing differently? And I think those are very similar questions to the sort of specialist support for foster carers. You know, what could we be doing differently? What are those ideas that are going to see those savings? And then in terms of the homes, I understand that staffing is a real issue. We have been struggling to get managers for our children's homes. We've had some that haven't been able to open in the last year. So we're 8 members of staff short on our children's homes at the moment. I think a lot of this is to do with our lack of workforce generally, but what are we going to do? We could get the homes, I believe that we could get the physical homes, but how would we recruit when we're having such a problem with recruit, and how are we going to see those savings if we can't fill them?
I'll pass on to Fiona unless Asha wants to come in to start with, but I just wanted, just for clarity, the numbers between children's and adults. The adult social care division has got quite an extensive transformation programme that's underway that already has identified over £10 million worth of savings in this year's MTFP, so 2022-27 MTFP. So that explains why there's the imbalance there. But Fiona, can you?
Hi. Yeah. So in terms of the foster carers and the foster placements, you will know we did increase our foster care fees. We'll need to review those. Sorry, I'll sit forward a bit. We have again become uncompetitive in the market in terms of our foster carers, so we need to review that and relook at that. We need to look at more creative options for our foster carers. We need to think about those house extensions, those council tax issues. We need to be able to offer kind of those kind of opportunities for our foster carers, and we need to think about a real targeted recruitment and marketing comms campaign. We know that people in Bristol have come forward at various points in times of crisis, and we've seen that, and we need to be able to kind of use what we know that we have about our Bristol citizens to ask them to come forward again at this time, but we need to do that in the right way with the kind of the right marketing and comms. So that's what we'd be looking for. In terms of the specialist programmes, there are well evidence-based programmes that are used in other local authorities that have been successful in terms of supporting foster carers to continue to look after children. So what we really want to make sure is that those children remain settled with their foster carers, and we don't have foster carers coming forward and saying they're unable to look after the children because of the traumatic behaviours that those children are presenting. So what we're looking at, one opportunity is to have clusters of foster carers. So 3 or 4 foster carers will form almost a group, like a kinship group. So if you were a member of a family, you would use your friends, you would use your family to look after your child for a night, for a day. That would be an informal arrangement that we do generally day in, day out with our own families and friends. So it's to create that type of environment for foster carers so that they have specific link carers that form that kind of kinship community around the children and would swap the children, have the children, look after children when things are becoming a bit more difficult. But that needs it needs some kind of strategic work around it. It's a programme, and we think that looking at other local authorities that have used that programme, it's been really successful. So it's those types of interventions. We also, you saw at the corporate parenting panel about the Bristol Therapeutic Support Service, who support our foster carers and support our children when things are becoming difficult for them. And we want to make sure that that's a really kind of robust service. We've seen good outcomes, we've seen good performance from that service, and we need to make sure that that service is kind of well funded to continue to do that work so that our children can remain with foster carers.
And the children's homes staffing.
Sorry.
Thanks.
So the proposal is, in terms of we're bidding for money, DFE to go in jointly. We'll be joining with our health partners around in terms of those homes for complex children with complex needs. We're looking at a strategic partner to join with us in terms of those homes. So that wouldn't be kind of us as a local authority directly recruiting for those homes, but we'd be looking for a strategic partner.
But does that make the workforce available? You know, there's a lack of care workers generally. There's a lack. We've had such a problem recruiting. I'm not sure whether it's a partner trying to recruit or whatever it might be that it will suddenly become available.
Can I come in? I think one of the issues that we have found is that we are really not competitive when it comes to the salary levels of our social care staff, whether that's maybe in adult and children's services. And just like adult services, we're about to embark on our own transformational change program. We've appointed somebody who's going to really kind of transform it. The service needs transforming. I feel, and I have felt for quite some time, there's a lot of spend, particularly on commissioned services, and I just believe we can do things. We can still do the same thing, but do it so much better. But what I want to do is also take some savings. Whatever savings we make, we also need to push that into increasing the salary levels for the staff so that we are so much more competitive. And I think in talking to some of our social care staff that I have met across the city over the last few months, some have actually left because of the salary, but they've even returned 9-10 months later because it's not about, it's about the salary, but for many, it's about the way in which we deliver our service. They far prefer coming back to Bristol in terms of our kind of philosophy and our values and all of that. So we do need to, because they have, we've tried our best to look at incentives, because staff know that we can't give them the salary increase straight away, but we have tried to look at different types of incentives. But yeah, until we are much more competitive, like many other local authorities, we are going to struggle. But, we are determined to kind of make that change.
John.
Thanks, Chair. The first 3 lines represent £11 million of savings and £11 million which actually perhaps improves the way we looked after children, which is very important as well, because there's quite a few people here from the corporate parenting panel, and we're very keen to see that the children are looked after really well. So that's £11 million, huge sum of money, without actually affecting or deteriorating the service. In fact, probably improving the quality of care that we offer through fostering and our own homes, rather than sending children miles away to Blackpool, Darlington, Durham, wherever. I suppose the question I've got, and Heather's already asked it, but I'll ask it again, because it really is the crux of the matter, really is, how realistic these savings are. And if I asked you out of 10, how likely do you think we're going to get these? Because it would be fantastic. If you can get this, we will love you to death, because it's an improved service for our kids, and it's a huge, huge saving for us. But the question is, Fiona, out of 10, where do you think we're likely to get? 5, 6, 7, 8, or are we going to hit the whole 10?
Let's start the ball rolling there. It's not without risk, but these are ambitious targets, and I'll talk for children and adults in this context because the same kind of themes apply for both, really. It's exactly as you say. We're spending huge amounts of money all over the country, and we're not getting the benefit of local services in so many ways. First, the services are disparate all over the place, really hard for us to monitor, really hard for us to get workers out to ensure that people are getting a progression in the service they receive. This is the same for younger adults with learning disabilities, autism, people with mental ill health, as it is in children's. Also, and in adults, you're talking getting on for £100 million in this context. In children's, less, but fewer, but very high cost often. If you're going to spend it here. Spend it building local capacity, spend it building local skills and services, and the economic multipliers are beneficial too. You've got to start somewhere, and these are the only kind of ambitions that we could possibly have, setting up strategic partnerships with excellent providers, local ones, but maybe ones from outside, ones with money to invest in the built environment, so that we can actually start to develop local services that meet our needs. And if we're in strategic partnership, we retain a level of control over those services instead of being at the wiles of a market which patently doesn't provide what we need. So there's an element of leap of faith to that, and I can't say 100% certainly that we would that these are safe savings, but they are great options for us to pursue if we're going to be ambitious for our kids and for our young adults with disabilities, and if we want to really spend our money properly locally and get the services we need and deserve.
Thanks for that. Can I just to give you an example? A couple of weeks ago, we had to sign off spend for 3 children in our care for £1 million. £1 million for 3 children, and we're squabbling, so if we're determined, and we certainly are, we can make those savings. And as you've heard, we're looking at building more kind of children's homes, going into also partnerships with our neighbouring authorities as well, because the reality is our neighbouring authorities are in exactly the same boat that we are in. We need more provision locally. I'd rather send a child to South Gloucestershire, North Somerset than Blackpool or Glasgow or wherever. So, so the intention is clear. And we also have to take the oxygen out of the market. I mean, the market is making money off of our vulnerable children, and I can't abide it any longer. So everything that we need to do to keep our children here, this is what we have to do. So some sacrifices will need to be made, but I'll give it, a 7, 6, 7, determined to make this happen. It means we all have to pull together in the same direction and do everything we possibly can to make that change. No more prevaricating. It's just got to get done.
Well, first of all, I mean, there's a technical answer to that, and it will be found in the Section 151 officer's view at corporate level of the amount of optimism bias there is in all the savings that are inherent in the budget that gets approved. So you'll find an answer somewhere in there. And it will be a collective view. And Denise, I know, won't give you an answer today because the due diligence is ongoing. And it will, I mean, that is effectively why we have that kind of contingency in the budget. But I do think it's important, you know, to say this is such this service is so sensitive to small changes in demand in a way that for those of us who, and we've done a huge amount of work in the last 6 weeks, we've spent hours and hours together, haven't we? Poring over this detail, and for when you consider these numbers and these decisions compared to yesterday's conversations about parks and libraries, for example, 3 children, that's our parks budget. And I think that this is actually another one of those potentially glass half full moments where actually treating this as our collective corporate challenge and frankly marshalling all of our resources. And I would include the senior leadership time in that. I would say we do need to expect better of the private sector. We need to hold them to account. But we also need to have a better, more productive conversation with health partners. In the interface between councils and the health system, you have one side of the debate where there's been 12 years austerity and the other side where there hasn't been. And one side where you can run a deficit and the other side where you can't. And you're making decisions under pressure about vulnerable people in distress. It's not the best time to negotiate who pays what. So I'm very interested in what underpins the custom and practice about who pays for what between the council, health partners and potentially other agencies. It feels like relatively fertile territory for us, doesn't it? And we need to be much more intentional, much more joined up. And just to give you one other example, yesterday, in fact, we didn't talk about, but we might have talked about, because Pete Anderson was in the room, the ongoing programme of disposal of surplus sites in the city. We own dozens of sites, as you all know, some of which have been to Cabinet recently for disposal. We expect to have another update in the new year on another crop of surplus assets. And so here we have surplus assets, and we have a service that desperately needs reprovisioning, more provision of in-city special facilities. What an opportunity. We haven't seized it before. I'm not even going to speculate why, but I would note that until probably 2 years ago, the budget for children's services wasn't something we really talked about a great deal. If you actually look at what the spend has done in the last 2 years, it is an extraordinary spike. And we understand why. We understand acuity and numbers have really gone through the roof. And we all understand that the crisis in mental health, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a relatively recent spike. So that's why it feels quite like almost unusually, like a new conversation about how do we get on top of this. And there's so much to go at. And I think we really are working together on it.
Right. I have Christine, then Tim, then Lorraine, then Brenda, and then Heather. And I really don't want to stop discussion because this is such an important issue, but can you be brief? Because we've got a load of other important issues that we need to address, and I'm thinking entirely of officers and cabinet members and not ourselves, but we don't want to be here until late in the evening. So if you can keep your points concise, that would be really helpful. So, Christine.
P11, 600,000 next financial year. So that's literally in a couple of months. You want to start seeing that saving. So are you on target for that in terms of recruitment? That's the first question. Because this has been going on for a while, this recruitment process for foster carers. And the second one is, what's the difference between a strategic partner and a private company that's currently in Glasgow or Blackpool making money out of the council paying for private foster care? What's the difference?
So in terms of the foster care recruitment, so that's 23-24 is the savings. So that's starting from next April. So if we can start as soon as possible, when we will work towards that, and that obviously is less than the 24-25 when we should be then at kind of full steam in terms of the recruitment of the foster carers. And that's why that's less for 23-24. And in terms of the strategic partner, yes, we would. We look for non-profit making organisations that we know and that we've worked with. That will be, we won't be entering into a partnership with a private organisation that we would have concerns about.
Can I? All right, Chair. Sorry. Just to add to that, a strategic partnership would be a procured arrangement whereby blocks of activity. We would be in control of those blocks of activity. We wouldn't be subject to the pricing mechanisms or the free pricing of the free market. And in doing so, we'd ensure that we got a good deal, a reasonable deal for all of the activity we buy. So it'd be activity we buy in block rather than spot purchases at whatever price they offer, and it would be activity that we're in control of.
Tim.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to make a point about sending children out of county. As a parent who's experienced this throughout my child's sort of education, first thing to say is this is nothing to do with austerity. This has been Bristol's problem for at least 20 years, if not more. I've had discussions going back right to since my son was sort of 7, 8 about lack of provision in Bristol and why there is much better quality provision in bizarre places like Midsummer Norton and Stroud than there is in Bristol. So this is a very long-term problem, and I don't think we're going to solve it in 2 years, whatever we do. But the plea I would make is to say it's not just about providing something in this city, it's providing something which is as good as the places that we're sending these children, because the places that my son's gone to out of county have been fabulous places and they take time to build that reputation.
Just coming, I absolutely agree with you, and I tell this story all the time to officers. 2010, when austerity bit, I was working for South Gloucestershire Council. I had responsibility for the SEN EHCP process. We worked collectively as 4 local authorities, not 3, 4 local authorities. We were continuing the process that we had in place. We saw, as officers, we saw the writing on the wall. We could see the trend in terms of the increase in the number of children and young people who were going to need our support. I left the authority in 2012 at a point where we were all having discussions between the 4 authorities about building, looking to the future. We lost that momentum. When I left, I came here, Paul was here as our Director of Education, and I said, what happened to the work that we were doing? Lost momentum because everyone decided to go back into their individual local authority silos instead of continuing the work together. So that's why I am determined that the conversations that we are having with our neighbouring authorities, that needs to be driven and we need to keep going. But you're absolutely right. We need fantastic provision right here, and it can be built. It doesn't, we can work with some of those other organisations who are delivering a really great provision. We just have to start those conversations and be meaningful about all of that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Because it's also important, we have to bring parents with us, because again, it's also down to parents' choice, but no disrespect, but the choice, because everyone wants to send their children to the best school, it's killing the budget. The budget is just, there is no budget. It's like, what the deficit is in DSG, and that will continue to grow until we grow more provision locally.
But it's not just about sending them to a better provision, is it? It's the fact that we haven't had the provision here anyway.
So say as well, the other thing that we also want to do, referring back to our belonging strategy, is also make sure that our schools are actually holding more of our children. There are children who are on the autistic spectrum for, quite mild, but it's just too easy a get-out clause for some of the schools not to hold our children. So again, we're very determined around the work we're doing around inclusion, the group that Fiona is chairing. The youth mayors have come out and said quite clearly we have to move towards 100% inclusion. I am encouraged by some of the conversations that I'm hearing in disparate parts of the organisation, but we just need to have a solid policy around that. But we also need to grow the confidence in parents who have lost confidence in that they can't send their children. I want to see more integration. I want to see more inclusion. But we also have to make sure that parents feel that they are confident that can happen. And that will help also towards... I'd rather spend that £1 million on the 3 children that we have to send wherever. I'd rather spend that on 20 schools in Bristol to create better provision so that they can hold those.
Actually, just to follow up on Tim's comment, and it's not a criticism because no one here was involved, but many years ago, for whatever reason, Bristol stopped sending children to St Christopher's School. I'm sure there were very good reasons for it, but stopped sending, the school gradually diminished, disappeared, and the site's been sold and is no longer available for provision of that service. But the point was, it was a site that was in Bristol. And so, yes, one wants quality provision, but actually for families, they actually, as you know, want it local as well. And hopefully the authority can see a role for helping to bring together the supply and demand to resolve and meet that in a way that satisfies the parental need for that service, but provision locally rather than at, in some cases, a great distance, which often has additional cost attached to it as well. Yeah.
Can I just say one last thing on that? Sorry, I know you wanted us to be brief, but and this was to do with austerity, I believe, but back in 2008-9, we used to have an autism outreach program run from our autism resource base in up at Gay Elms, as was, and that was doing brilliant work, going into many different schools, teaching the teachers there how to cope, giving them strategies with how to cope with these kids so that they didn't have to lose them. And that ran for 2 years, and then the budget was cut completely, and I don't believe we've done anything like that scale since. But that was a fantastic intervention that was really helping those schools to keep those children there.
Yeah, so we are looking to develop the specialist places, like you've just said. So, and there are some. We have recently submitted a bid to look for a new free school, which is on a site that we do own in Bristol, because finding the sites is often the biggest challenge. So there is sort of planning to go further with the specialist places programme as well. Because it's absolutely right what you say around, we want the places to be closer to the communities where the children are. We want to reduce, the need for long travelling and distances as well, because that adds to cost, but also it's not a great thing for young people to be doing. And then in terms of the work that we're doing in the city, we've obviously, through the written statement of action, there was a requirement for us to look at the training development across schools and settings in the city. So we have a SEND workforce training development programme now in place, which offers a range of training right the way through for governors, leaders, but also practitioners as well. And some of that includes work through, around autism, around particular specialist needs of children, because that's part of our strategy to try and hold more children in mainstream education as well, stop the escalation of needs so that they end up having to move into more specialist provision. So that we're trying to tackle it at different levels, so to make sure we've got specialist places children can stay in the city, high quality, but also at the same time improving the capacity of our mainstream schools. And we're doing a similar piece of work around alternative provision as well, where we look at an outreach model. So like you were talking about going into schools and building capacity, it's not always about the children coming out of their setting and going into AP as well, although there is still a place for that for certain young people. So the SEND development partnership plan that we're working on now is the sort of next iteration after the inspection, the recent inspection, and that will have those themes tied into it that you're talking about. So potentially, again, supporting, probably driving down some of the demand in the high needs block rather than maybe general fund in the council, but another area where we've got those spending pressures. Yeah.
Right, members, I've got Lorraine, Brenda, Heather, and Tim. And what I'm going to suggest to try and speed things up is if you can each make your comments, and then I'll come to officers to respond to those four. So, Lorraine first.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a general comment, really, which doesn't necessarily need an answer. I'm concerned about the savings and how there's not, you know, a good, I would say, going back 12 plus years, mainstream schools, before they were academies, often did have special educational need department attached to them, and they've been, you know, they were removed, most of them. It's not just going to be a quick fix. It would take, it's not just about training, because training is a ongoing specialist type of training for working with people with autism. It's you're, with respect, I understand that you want to be in hope, but it's unrealistic because there's a lot involved. Sorry, that's just my personal opinion. And what I am also concerned about, this is my last point, is about the equalities impact statements, because I know I go on about them, but there is something fundamentally wrong with us not having it, because it's crucial to the debate, and it should be more robust right now, even though I know this is a work in progress. I think there is a lot more elements that could be in here around the impact statements, etc. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, so I'm not expecting some super duper answer. I'm just saying those are my 2 points.
Lorraine, just to comment on that point, the impact statements will come if these proposals are in the budget proposals. So yeah, officers will be working those up, but they wouldn't be done at the consultation stage. So it's work in progress, not least because we imagine that all these proposals are likely to be needed. So it is something that will happen, and I believe, Denise, those will be included in, if they're budget proposals, will be included in the papers produced in January.
Yeah, they will. I think just for further information, just for members that weren't at the session yesterday, a lot of these propositions are at different stages. Some of them are quite early in their infancy, others are more developed, and therefore for some of them, officers have already got a bit more detail in terms of impact assessment. So in relation to that, we continue to do the impact assessments. We take it on its journey. It's an evolving document. But when we get to the point in terms of final decisions, you will see then the full impact assessment. And then in areas where we're going out for consultation on specifics, you'll see even more details there as well as part of that. So again, it's just sort of retracing the point that each of these are at different stages, and some of them already have impact assessments that are being developed and proposed as well as part of this pack. But when you go to the final budget, you'll have an impact assessment for everything that's in the pack, and you'll also have a cumulative impact assessment that looks at the collective proposition, so that you know, we're trying to avoid unintended impact on you know, protect those with protected characteristics. If we have a lot of propositions that are going to impact on the same vulnerable groups, that comes through the cumulative impact assessment as well.
Sorry, yeah, because last year during the budget there was a lot of these. Even at that stage, I'm not being critical. I'm just, as a new councillor now, they weren't enough. It was just, it was almost like a cut and paste exercise. So hopefully it'll be a bit more kind of specific, because we're talking about staffing as well as the actual young people or young adults that we're talking about as well. Thank you.
Brenda.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the questions I was going to ask have already been asked, so I won't go through them again. I'll just point out one thing, that we've actually got a centre of excellence in Bristol that people travel to from outside, which is Elmfield School for the Deaf, which just happens to be in my ward as well. But my question was about special guardianship of orders, and making sure that if we have those in place, that we do provide appropriate support, including financial support to the grandparents and relatives that are taking this on. Because again, I've had an issue where somebody was doing that for teenagers and had no support for quite a long time till I got involved. So can we make sure that happens, please.
Heather? Tim?
Yeah, really quickly, Richard, and you can answer this outside this meeting, but I know St Barnabas, which is 300 yards away from me, is quite interested in providing special educational needs, and I understand they've been kind of batted back, so I don't kind of get that if we're looking for sites to do that. So, again, you might want to just answer me outside that, because it might be more complicated than that very brief question.
Yeah, I think it probably is best. I'm quite happy to have a conversation about it, but probably not best here now. That's okay.
Martin?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I must stop it somewhere. Okay, thanks. Yeah, going back to something that was said about enhancing the availability of fostering in Bristol that Fiona Tudge mentioned earlier, which was adding rooms for families to be able to accommodate foster children, if I'm right. And that was something that it was. I made a budget amendment several years ago that led to the housing revenue account capital being available for extra rooms to be added to council houses. And the first two of those were foster families who no longer had room to accommodate a larger family with a teenage fosterer. And I have to say, it was probably the most worthwhile thing I've done as a councillor in 9 years, to be able to provide that budget that led to those homes for real people to live a life with a family. This depends on HRA capital, that budget did. Is that available to continue to add rooms for foster families to get an additional room where the house can accommodate it, obviously? Because otherwise it can't be done through this budget, can it?
I'm going to make the point. I think we've been looking at the example that adult social care has done in working close, and this is the point about working smarter as an organisation. And it's the one thing I say to staff in the children's services team. We are more than the sum of our greater parts, okay? Instead of working in a silo and thinking, this is just the budget for children's services, and keep busting the budget, we work as one council, okay? The families we support need housing. We have housing, we have assets that you were saying. There are different ways in which we can work where funding support can be. And I know that through the HRA, it's something that Councillor that Tom has actually kind of agreed to support. So we're just following in the same vein as adult social care, really.
So there will be provision.
So
that's all I need.
If I can respond, so there's already a line item in the existing capital programme for children's transformation. We're obviously reviewing all of that in preparation for the budget. Yesterday we had a conversation about temporary accommodation and how we're getting, frankly, better and more joined up at thinking about how we might be able to legitimately use the HRA around general needs. So the conversations are happening. It's probably not right to go any further today. Clearly the HRA budget is itself under review, so there will be more to say, I think, going forward.
Right. Can I move us on to the next three items in that group, which are P24, support for families and special guardians, which Brenda mentioned, P15, worker retention, and P25, Bristol Children's Homes. And I just wanted to just make a couple of comments. One is, obviously anything that saves money we welcome, but families and special guardians need, as long as the support they get is being maintained and we're doing it more efficiently, that's fine, but they need the support. I had a question in terms of P15 because we're retaining social workers, but we're making a saving. Now, I understand why we're making a saving if we're not having to recruit, but on the other hand, if we're having to be competitive, I'd expect there to be a cost. So I have a concern there. And in terms of children's homes, yes, capacity, but is that a viable, realistic saving? And can we be assured it's not going to be detrimental to the service that's being delivered? If someone would like to answer,
I think so. There's a couple of angles, but the recruitment one, I think Fiona, you're in a good position to answer. I mean, in regard to agency staff and potential savings, is that okay?
Yeah, in terms of the savings, that's a net saving at the moment. We've got spend on our agency social workers, so that, you know, it's relatively low compared to other local authorities, but it's a high spend in terms of what you're spending for an agency social worker compared to a social worker who's on a permanent contract working for the City Council. So our ambition is to reduce that use of agency social worker and make those savings by supporting through initiatives to improve the retention and recruitment of our social workers. So that's where the savings would come.
Hiya, thanks very much. I just wanted to be sure that the support for families and special guardians was not just passing over the care of our of our special educational needs peoples to the family members at the end of the day, because you're trying to make £120,000 worth of savings and at the same time supporting it. Are you just not passing over that responsibility directly to those families? I'm just asking the question. Thanks.
No, no, we're not. We have kind of built more resilience into our special guardianship support team, so that special guardians will have allocated social workers and will have ongoing support. So that's happened over the last 18 months, and we will sustain that and keep that going as financial compensation for special guardianship arrangements has been maintained. So we're not looking to change that, and we'll increase that support. So no, there's absolutely a clear robust support package around our special guardians. We've got more we've mirrored many of the support offers to foster carers. So we have support groups, we have special event days. So all of those activities that we have for foster carers, we have now replicated for our special guardians.
Sorry, if I may, as a relative newcomer to this, I mean, I think this is a far better thing for children than it is to effectively put them into the care system. So this is effectively making better decisions for children to improve the quality of their lives, and the saving will come about because it's a win-win. So the more we can place children and support them to be placed with special guardians, the fewer fall into the care system, and the numbers speak for themselves. That is a very good thing for us as a council financially, but even better for the children themselves. So we're putting more money in, and hopefully we'll get a better return all round.
Zoe.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, just for my understanding, with special guardians, are any payments made to the special guardians to support them?
Yes.
Similar to foster care?
Yes.
'Cause I think I saw something. Right.
Yeah.
All right. I think I saw something about that. It was different, and now it's been brought up. So they get both financial support as well as support, networking support in how to do things. Yeah. On an absolute similar level. Yeah.
We raised the cost for foster carers, kinship carers, all of them. Everybody got the same. We're not discriminating.
Christine, and then I'll move on to the
I just want to make a bit more of a general comment about, because some of this discussion has gone into the DSG. What people are actually asking questions about is the funding from the DSG, and because there was also mentioned the HRA and how these budgets come together in order to support our most vulnerable children. And I think that is indicative of how much we as elected members need to better understand the DSG and what's going on and what that's spent on, and the HRA. And neither of those two areas, despite being actually the largest part of the budget, were really open to scrutiny or discussed, in my view, this time last year. And I think it's something that we certainly I, as better need to better understand. But I know that other elected members need to better understand the DSG, because it's got the biggest part of the deficit, and it's not in any of this here. And I know that the forum look at it, and that's fine. However, from a political perspective, it's only the administration and possibly one person in that administration that's overlooking that, and then with officers. So I think we as members need to understand what's going on with that.
Yeah, to just not correct, but to just inform you, certainly Resources Scrutiny Commission did look at the dedicated schools grant last year, because we expressed significant concern about the deficit, but that highlights the benefit of doing this jointly, because it clearly crosses both commissions. But we did look and ask a fair number of questions, and I think we may be asking the same questions again this year, if I had to guess. Stephen, did you want to?
Only a small point on the HRA. In fact, last year we did an extensive public consultation with several in-person and online events, and there was extensive member involvement in that. I recognise your point is about how they work together in effect, but the HRA, obviously this is not what this scrutiny is about today. This is budget proposals for the general fund, but you know, there will be opportunities to look at the HRA and no doubt the DSG.
Yeah, so can I just say, in respect to the DSG, we're currently out to consultation now with the schools. I mean, it's a different pot of money. I mean, it literally feels like we get the money and we have to pass it on. We're not supposed to interfere. It's schools' money, but the reality is that budget is being busted, and so we have a series of plans to try and kind of reduce that. But yeah, we've been given a bit of a reprieve by government.
Yes, I did just want to come in to respond and to partly agree with both Councillor Townsend and with Councillor Craig. That the DSG is reviewed. It's reviewed in depth by the Task and Finish Group, and we also ensure that Cabinet are also briefed on the details and are clear on the decisions that need to be made by the Council in relation to the DSG, and the decisions that need to be made by the Schools Forum as well, because they are slightly different, but we cover both of those with Cabinet, and we do an extensive detail review as part of the Task and Finish Group. Similarly, we also ensure that the HRA again is appropriately covered, and that is also on the schedule of activities as part of the next stage of the budget process. But I do absolutely agree that there needs to be greater awareness in the DSG, and I think actually we have achieved that, because I'm seeing a lot more discussion about the DSG in the last year or two than what I have ever noted. So that's an improvement. So we've just got to be small steps, Councillor Townsend, but we are getting there, and I think there is absolutely much more awareness now about the DSG deficit, the SEND pressures that weren't as were previously. And I think in the consultation as well, there is a reference to the SEND consultation and a link to sort of say there are some mitigation proposals in the SEND as well, and it's sort of just, again, as part of the public consultation, it does actually point to that, so that the public can go along and have a look at those mitigation proposals. So we are doing as much as we can to raise the awareness and actually look at this as a whole, and recognising the decisions you will need to make as council when we come back in February. So yeah.
So I've just broken the habit and read an email from Heather, which is suggesting that we should consider something jointly with people and resources. And I was thinking along the same lines, and I think this is something beyond necessarily the budget process, but it does seem to me that an understanding of the DSG and the HRA and all sorts of other sources linking into this that could be available to help solve the problem could be worthwhile. And I think my thinking is that it probably needs a member briefing in the first instance, and then a scrutiny meeting following that. I would not dare to suggest that necessarily before Budget Council, but I'm wondering whether that's something we might put into our work programme moving forward, because I think it would help for members to have I'm aware that we're under time pressure and I nearly missed Mark Bradshaw out, so I'll take Mark, and Zoe's caught my eye. And then I really want to move on to the rest of, oh, and Tim, but if you can delay it to another item, that would be even better. Yep. Mark? Yep.
Right, okay. On the social worker retention issue, if I can just raise a point there, I'm just interested to learn, because of I hear what's been said about the competitiveness in the marketplace, but retaining the people that we've got, because of the demanding nature of the work involved, what investment we're putting into their mentoring and their well-being, because I think that obviously plays a key part in this.
I'll let Fiona maybe respond to that. But again, that's a question I ask the staff when I've gone out to see them. I've been to East Central, I've been to North, and I've been to South. And every social worker or every member of staff I've asked them about their mental health and well-being, because it's social work. They're dealing with some, really difficult situations. And each time they have all said to me that the well-being support and the support that they get from the team and other services is really, really good. It's second to none. So I don't know if you want to describe what that looks like, but yeah, the team do feel well held, but I think it's the stress of having less staff and a growing number of need will always impact on their well-being. But Fiona?
Yeah, I can just describe that offer a bit better. So each social worker would have monthly supervision with their manager. They also have the group supervision with their teams and peers on a monthly basis. We've got quite an extensive developed training programme, so we've invested in our social workers in their professional development. We practice systemic social work, and that's a highly regarded, externally accredited courses, so that we fund that, and we're committed to doing that, so they have opportunities of professional development through that. We also have access to clinical supervision for our social workers. We hold a fund for that in our children's workforce and development, and we when social workers feel that they might be struggling a bit or have a particular difficult issue, then we have access to funding clinical supervision for them.
Hi, I was going to raise the point that Heather did, and presumably if we did one on HRA, we'd do jointly with communities. I'm getting that thing, yeah. But I did want to, while we've got you here, for children's services and adult social care, that I raised, can't remember where I raised it, but in terms of having spoken to housing officers about the that they feel, they were saying that some of the issue is about where the threshold has been set for social worker intervention, means that families are falling out of social work support, and then housing officers having to pick up the pieces, similar with police. Just wondering I did raise it in another meeting, and I was assured that those discussions were taking place to make sure that that threshold, if it had been raised, was being lowered again to be able to help pick up the pieces, because obviously there's going to be more and more families under stress, needing support, and if we're sort of increasing our threshold, they won't be getting that support. So how we're balancing that, obviously, with the need for the budget. I don't know if I'm straying a bit out of the remit of this, but can we be reassured on that? Because obviously then...
Well, I can make a comment about the interface with the housing service, and it's recognised, as you say, that there is a change in the profile of some people who are coming into contact with housing officers, and so we're trying to address that through work that we're doing in the housing service. I don't think it's appropriate here to go beyond that, given some of the context, which you'll be aware of, but given this is obviously a budget proposals discussion, but I'm certain there'll be another opportunity to talk about that. It's something we are very, very aware of in terms of overall workflow, work burden on the housing service, and maybe colleagues here can speak to where it joins social care.
A lot of this comes back to proposals that were agreed, remember, by Council in February about making better use of our general needs housing stock, where people with a social care assessment previously weren't even allowed to go on home choice. And so it is about making sure that people with low-level support needs are able to access general needs housing, because it's about the point that Stephen made earlier in relation to another point. It's about making best use of our own stock. And I think there are plenty of people who look at Bristol and think you've got 27,000 units of stock and you need to be making best use of those. And as I understand it, there was quite a long discussion about temporary accommodation with Tom yesterday. But don't be misled that people who have a social care support package would still get that, whether they were in our housing or anybody else's. So the adult social care support for those people, that might be, we might get that through another organisation like Keyring, one of those other organisations that do some fantastic work in the city. But, you know, we should be making best use of all of those 27,000 units for the people who can make best use of it. I'm really, really clear about that. And it is something that was in this year's budget that was agreed by council.
Tim, did you want to go in?
Yeah, just very quickly, just responding to Christine's point. I know the conversation did veer off into education a bit, but the point I was making generally also applies to post-education young adults, and that was the point I was making, is that we still send them out of county for provision, and we want to bring that back in. So that's why I do know what the DSG is, and that's why we kind of ended up where we were.
And I think really to follow on from that, the points we've also discussed about spending to save are potentially very apparent in terms of that provision, because we then are in control of it rather than someone else determining the price we pay for the provision. So I think really important. Yes, Helen.
Just this might segue us into the adults part of the conversation anyway, but the work that we're doing joining children's and adults provision and the transition from children's services to, I know that this is dear to your heart, Tim, but that is something that we're increasingly doing, and I hope everybody knows about it because we've made enough fuss about it. But you know, if you haven't looked at the blog and the fly-through of the Addison apartments out in Sea Mills, where we've refurbished, I mean, that makes it sound as if it's, you know, lick of paint. The whole place has been completely reimagined, and that is a home for 6 disabled young people. The ones who have been brought to that to live there have all been in out of authority places. So it's a fantastic example. And you know, the point that we always make, if you ever want children and young people to integrate back into their city, then being stuck in a farmhouse on Dartmoor or whatever is not the way to do that, is it? So the response from the Sea Mills community, led a lot by Don Alexander as the councillor there, to make sure that charity shops, gardening projects, all those kinds of people are able to provide opportunities for those young people. I mean, we should be just so proud of the work that we've done there. And of course, the unit cost is a great deal less and people are where they want to be.
So I mean, I'll reiterate the comment, and I know you're on side and officers are on side, but the spend to save potential for that is disproportionately good, and is there the possibility for bringing forward capital projects quicker to reduce those costs faster and actually give us a better service than we're currently getting, and knowing, you know, if one looks at the social value of that money being spent within our community rather than outside it, the wins are enormous. So I think I'm looking to Scrutiny colleagues, but I believe that's something we've been highlighting is an issue, and we would like to think that was going to be prioritised.
And it has been.
Yeah.
I mean, the Better Lives at Home, it's got the funny acronym BLAH, BLAH, but the BLAH programme, which we've got, is about delivering more extra care housing. And people think extra care housing is you know, just for older people, but housing for people with a range of support needs, and we're doing all sorts of innovative things. So Addison is the first one. There's a development in Lockleys. I'm sure that David is aware of it because it's in his patch at the Blake Centre. There's one at New Fossway that's going to be coming on stream. So providing more of that within the city is absolutely, you know, in terms of bangs for your bucks, that's where you want to be, isn't it?
You. Just very briefly to update, on a similar note, there has just been agreed the contractual arrangement for a bespoke housing conversion with Elim Housing for one individual who is a 34-year-old woman who has been living under the Transforming Care cohort, learning disabilities, autism, kind of secure support in inverted commas for all of her adult life, and she's in her early 30s. She is going to be coming back to Bristol at some stage early in the new year, by April certainly, and that not only is that person going to be moving out of secure accommodation into her own bespoke house with a care team and everything, but also the savings are going to be, I can't quantify them, but they're significant. It'll be about 2/3 the price of what's being paid now. It'll run into hundreds of thousands. So really, you know, there's lots of work underway to really exploit the benefits of those kind of solutions.
Yeah, thank you. Now, members, I recognise that we haven't dealt with the items in section 2, which are P23, early help in communities, P14, trauma-informed programme, P21, home to education transport, and P13, keeping families together, which lot combined to £4 million. But I recognise if I give the same amount of time to that as we do to everything else, Helen is not gonna. It's gonna feel very left out because we won't get to adult care. So what I propose is if I issue a challenge to officers, is could you give us a written response that Joe can circulate to everybody, to just assure us that those savings are not going to produce a deterioration in the services that are being provided, because from the narrative, I find it hard to understand that, and it would be helpful if we could have a note on that. But members, I propose, if you have anything else on those 4 topics, email Joe in the course of tomorrow. But I'm proposing that we now move on to adult care. I trust everyone's happy with that. Yeah, okay. So we move on to adult care, and we'll start again with section 1. And in that section we have P9 adult care staffing, P10 where I can't read my handwriting, purchasing budget, yeah. That's right. And the P6, the East Bristol Intermediate Care, and those 3 contribute £6.4 million. So it seemed to me that that was those combined were an area where we would have some questions or concerns. Does anybody want to lead on that? Tim?
Great, thanks very much. P6, I understand. You know, we've been involved in kind of that sort of bridging to hospital with, and probably put more resource into that than many other places, and maybe should look at the NHS. So I kind of get that one. I'm really worried about P9, the loss of, which will be including assessment staff, because the way it's written is about our statutory function. I am concerned that this makes it difficult to deliver on the rest of the transformation programme, because that requires people being reassessed for assistive technology and the many other things that you know about. And also actually whether we get to meet our statutory responsibility around assessment by taking that many staff out of the budget. I also think it juxtaposes with children, which is, we've said, as John and Heather has said, there are some things that we should be doing anyway that we hope will get better. I'm sorry, that sounds a bit unkind, but you know what I mean. Whereas this and East Bristol, there are some real tangible things, but I'm really worried about the implications, the transformation of all those things. So I just mentioned the other one as well. The other one's around the purchasing budget. I think that one does feel a bit hopeful. I mean, we all know there are providers of especially of high-level specialist packages that do make large profits, but in my care home, for example, one of those people that have the same rates for private and council clients, and we don't make a profit. We will not be able to accept the rates that are likely to come out of that. And again, I know that's something personally that we've been trying to manage the market for many years. So it's the kind of the challenge is, how is that actually going to make a difference now? And is there really, especially with the cost of living, we have to pay our staff 10% more to compete with Amazon, for example. The costs are doing nothing but going the other way. So that feels a bit optimistic to be making massive savings unless it is focused on those high-end ones. So that's my sort of comments on all three. You can answer them in any which way you like.
I'll start with some of that, Tim, and I'm glad that you've said what you've said about East Bristol, although the conversations are ongoing about whether somebody could take that on, because unlike South Bristol, where the facilities were outdated, East Bristol is good facilities, and the resource is needed in the system as a whole because of the pressure on the hospitals to get people out, as you know. Although I think that what we know is that actually a lot more people could be supported to go back home with the right support than into an intermediate facility of any kind. I think that on the purchasing budget, I just wanted to say something on that, because it isn't necessarily just about telling wicked private sector care homes, because this is portrayed to me quite often that we're paying money that ends up in the Cayman Islands or something. It's also about making sure by those reviews that people are getting the right package. So if we're paying a lot for more support than the person needs, then that's the wrong thing to do with our money as well, isn't it? So some of that is a very targeted monitoring and reviewing of those packages, and making sure that we're not, I think Hugh uses the expression, sometimes we're paying a lot to do the wrong thing with people, and making sure that those are the right, it's the right support. But getting more providers to accept the Bristol rate, wherever the Bristol rate ends up, because some of that has got to take account of real living wage and so on, which we want our providers to be paying people properly. Of course we do. So I think it's not just as simple as going to them and saying, will you take these people for less?
Thanks for that. Stephen will talk in more detail about the staffing end of it. I think the context of the third-party spend element, the purchasing budget thing, is that the adult social care purchasing budget is by a long way the biggest entity in the finances of this organisation, especially in the context of the general fund. It's about £170 million. So 4 million from that, whilst it is a huge amount of money, is actually proportionally comparatively small. There are other savings that we've got in train also that would look to reduce spend on it. Helen's absolutely right. It goes from the macro all the way through to the way the market is and how it's organised, and some of the eye-watering costs that we have to pay for things. And the conversations we've had earlier about children's and strategic provision and local provision apply. But also it's about scrutiny of the at least, usually 70 to 100 decisions that we make each week that are about changing the price that we pay for care. And whilst I do know we've got excellent workers who work very hard, and many of them are on message in regard to the diligence around the budget, we can't guarantee that every single one of those is a good decision. Add them all up over a year and you've got quite a significant amount of money either way. And so we're of the opinion now that if you scrutinise, you pay really close attention to it, then we will get savings just by doing that. just by dint of being on top of it on a day-to-day basis. Likewise, you know, it's about reviewing, because when people come out of hospital, generally we prescribe quite high because people are in high levels of need, but quite often 2, 4, 6 weeks later they may not be, and yet it may take a lot longer than that before the package is amended. So it's all those kind of, it's the marginal gains bit alongside the big picture elements.
But more reviewing means more staff. So again, going back to P9.
It's unfair for me to hand over to Stephen on that on that one. I will do, yeah. Simply we've been running on quite significant low numbers of staff for a period of time anyway, due to recruitment. And so I think that in working what our optimal minimal level of staffing is and trying to stick to that, we retain a safe level of staffing that we know will deliver against what we need to do. And so it's not like we're not ever going to recruit again. It's just about making sure that we know what level of staffing we need. And we have been operating on 10 to 20% fewer than we are budgeted for 2 or 3 years because of the pandemic, because of workforce shortages, because of the shortfall of qualified social work staff. I hope I've not...
But just before Stephen comes in, there is an element, Tim, though, also of of this becoming business as usual, really, and that how social workers allocate packages, you know, they need to have this in their minds all the time, and not to assume that whatever is assessed as need, that's it. It does have to be monitored, and I think that we've got to work in that way and work smarter.
Stephen wants to just come in, but at the risk of being provocative, one of the problems about corporate memory is, I remember, and you do, Helen, and 1 or 2 others may, that the idea of assessing packages early was being raised at least 10 years ago, if not longer ago than that. So I welcome it, because actually it goes both ways, both those who are getting more than they need, and actually more seriously those who aren't getting as much as they need because it's deteriorated. But that was identified. So if you can crack the way of making that work, then I'm sure that not only produces a cost saving, but it's actually a better
in the times that I've done that in different jobs over the years, the net result does tend to be quite significant reductions in spend, because yes, there are people that need more, but there's usually quite a number of people that actually are quite willing to take less. So I think that it's about being diligent, and as Helen says, keeping on top of that on a day-to-day basis. Things like global pandemics tend to take one's eye off the ball of that kind of activity. And
we'll let you off on that one. Yeah,
thank you. But Stephen, do you want to talk about the staffing?
Just wait.
Oh, sorry.
Stephen, do you want to...
I just want to make the point about proportionality. I mean, we're here talking about a service with £170 million third-party spend, 50 to 100 decisions a week, each of which costs this council an average of £25,000. And if we're not putting more scrutiny internally as officers with political oversight on that system, and ensuring that the culture that makes those decisions is held to account in the same way as someone running a parks budget or a bin collection service, then we're doing something wrong. It's a simple fact, and it's also true to say we would all, as human beings, tend to focus on what's in front of us and give less attention to things that we decided on 6 or 12 months ago. And 6 or 12 months ago, a lot of additional support was being provided because we were in a pandemic. And I would not ask, because I don't want to hold anybody here to account in this horrible way, if anybody knew how many cases and packages we'd reviewed back down that were more expensive because of COVID. As just an example of active management and Hugh's point, which is if you do take more care, you will drive out savings. And nothing can be immune from our requirement to balance a budget. Demand is not the only part of the equation. Supply is constrained, and we have to make it work. And we need to ask our senior managers and all of their teams to do more and go further, to be essentially budget managers as well as responsible frontline operators. It is a cultural shift, and it's a system change. Hugh's brought in some new approaches as of a week ago in terms of commissioning, getting much more into that. And we will be seeing that in terms of monitoring what's going on at our corporate leadership board and with cabinet members. By the way, that doesn't mean anybody outside of the statutory director is making any decisions. Clearly that would be inappropriate at case level. But overall, we want to be right alongside Hugh and his team, helping to ensure that we can live within our means. Because as you well know, we haven't been. And that is going to lead to only one conclusion unless we get on top of it.
I've got nothing against looking at packages. I just think the two don't necessarily fit well when we're reducing staff at the same time as increasing assessments. I'd also like to know whether we're particularly out of kilter with other authorities on our spend per head on this. But
In regards to being out of kilter with other authorities, yes, we have just had the 21-22 Use of Resources report, which I know you'll be familiar with, which is produced annually by the LGA. We tend to spend high, but in the southwest we tend to spend high. We're actually reducing in the context of the southwest as a whole, which is a small gain. We spend high more on the younger adults side of things than we do on older people, where we benchmark relatively middle of the road. And on younger adults, in certain contexts, we are quite high, even for the southwest. So you'll see the emphasis that we've been talking about is very much about learning disabilities, autism, stopping placing people out of area, building local capacity. That's all in the context of that, really. So that said, that's a tanker to turn round. And so the longer term transformational work will be addressing that. But some of these short term mitigations are intended to try and address that pretty fundamentally straight away to ensure that we can get a little bit closer to benchmark levels of spend.
Lorraine?
Shall Stephen just have in regard to the workforce element of it?
All right. Yeah, Stephen, please, and then I'll take Lorraine.
Yeah, I mean, first, just on the purchasing budget, it is absolutely about managing demand and strength-based practice, which we implemented several years ago, and some of that did get lost through the pandemic because some of those services were not available in the community. I wouldn't want people to believe that our practitioners are giving people support that they don't need, but it is the cost of that. So it's as much about demand management and strength-based practice alongside the supply of those services at reasonable cost, which we're looking at through the adult social care purchasing budget. But Tim, I appreciate your comments and it's helpful feedback, because you're absolutely right. We do need the right level of workforce to ensure that we can deliver the reviews and the assessments, strength-based practice at the right time for people. So part of that saving is about not using agency staff and a restructure of our management, which is senior management and some of the management roles in our in-house services, which we're reducing. But also it's about, as Hugh says, is just having the right threshold of staff in order that we can deliver the practice that we need to save on the purchasing budget. And we will continue to review and model that. So if we think that we need that we need more staff, then we'll have to save more than the 4 million on our purchasing budget. So we've still got to save the money, and the council as a whole needs to reduce the staff. But we will monitor that really closely. If we think if we can't get to do the assessments and reviews at the right time because we're short of staff, it is, as Hugh said, in the context of us actually being short of practitioners because of recruitment issues. So, and like Fiona has said, we are also looking at recruitment and retention, staff well-being, really supporting our workforce with during quite a challenging time. So the feedback's helpful, and I think it's just probably the balance between how much we save on the purchasing budget alongside how much we save on the staffing budget is something we can review if we think it's not working or one's impacting on the other.
Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm just going to raise this as a concern about do we know about we've had the census, but do we know about our ageing population and an overall overview of potentially who's going to be coming into the services, because we'll know that from childhood. So if there's adverse childhood situations going on, or we have people living with a disability of some description, etc. So do we know the projection moving forward? Because I'm a little bit concerned that I know we have to save money, but there's a big emphasis on budgets versus people, because that's what we're talking about, isn't it? We're talking about providing care to people, whether it's in their homes or whether it's in hospitals or wherever it might be. And we can't just say it's about, okay, we're going to save this amount of money, but what about the population that we're actually trying to serve? And I know you're not saying that because that's not your background to be having those thought processes, but it's really important for us not to forget that it's about people and people accessing care. And just as though we can lower the rate of care packages going out, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be a wave of people requiring care packages. So it's not like it's not like to say, okay, if we can reduce care packages, it solves the problem, because there's always going to be people needing care.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's all well. I don't know whether Christina might want to come in with some of the population health angle that underpins that. I think we haven't got a super aging population like some of the parts of the country have. We have got, I think, a population bulge in the middle-aged kind of area, you know, 40s to 50s, which in the end will come through as older people that require older people's services. I don't know whether you want to elaborate on that at all, Christina, particularly.
Thanks. Yeah, so the equation in terms of anticipating need is both age and deprivation poverty outcomes. So age in itself actually doesn't predicate frailty. And you will all know that there are areas in our city where people are aging in their 50s, and other areas actually where they're quite young in their 70s and 80s. So that's the inequality. Now, there are two or probably three places that we have a lens on that. The first is through the Joint Strategic Needs Analysis, which is not a document anymore. It's an up-to-date repository of information, and it's on the council website. That's one of the statutory responsibilities of Public Health and of the Health and Wellbeing Board to produce that. And we develop it along with neighbouring local authorities. And as we've moved into the new health and care system, we're looking at needs analysis both at system level, so what Asha was talking about earlier about making sure that we're looking at our sub-region, our neighbouring authorities, which is our health and care system, our place, which is our local authority, but also our localities and our neighbourhoods, because if you really want to see inequality and future needs, you need to look at much more granular detail. Adult social care does do some modelling, but we've got the potential with the development of the new health and care system to do much more with our shared data analysis. Very powerful statistical tools that we can now use, which will model. And indeed, some of our localities, North and West locality, have done some really interesting work on this, because they had worked out that actually if they focused their healthy ageing programme on older people, it was too late. And if they really wanted to address health inequality and keep people living well for longer, they needed to be looking at their 40s and 50s population in certain groups. So I would certainly wouldn't claim that we've got it all right. We've probably got all the bricks on the pavement, as it were, and a lot of potential to really use analytics better. But do go and have a look at the JSNA resources and let us know if you see of anything that you think could be improved. Thanks.
I just wanted to come back and kind of bring that to life, really, because first of all, obviously, as people come into the system, we won't be going, sorry, we've run out of money, we can't serve your needs. But as these transformations embed, the needs will be met in different ways. And most of us, if we think about our own futures, most of us will hope that we'll carry on living in communities that we've known and loved all our lives, and we'll be getting the support from either community organisations, that we'll move into extra care housing. How many of us think, oh, I'm going to end up in a nursing home? I'm sure most people really don't want that prospect. So the transformation of the service does mean that what the options will be for people as they get older, and people, as Christina said quite rightly, you know, this whole thing about ageing well doesn't start when you're 65 or 70. It starts when you're probably when you're 5, not even when you're 45. So that is what's taken into consideration, and it's where the agendas of the Health and Wellbeing Board, Adult Social Care, Children's Services, I know Ash has had to go now, but certainly the work that we're doing with the integrated care system, that is what this is all about. So, you know, we're not going to say, sorry, you don't, you know, you meet the threshold, but we can't provide you with anything any longer.
Members, I'm aware of the time, and I'm inclining to the view that 3 hours is probably the maximum we can be effective, and certainly for officers and cabinet members to be on the receiving end of questions, I think it might even be too long. So I'm suggesting that we try and bring things to a conclusion. But if there, first of all, are there any other points anyone wants to raise on those 3 items we were discussing? If not, then the remaining items in section 2 are P1, P5, P7 and P20, which I will now try and find. So that's Bristol Community Links, Redfield Lodge, Concord Lodge, and and neighbourhood teams, yeah. So those were the 4 items there. So is there anything anyone wants to raise on those? Martin?
Yes, thanks. We've gotten to the communities and neighbourhood teams, P20. If I can jump to that, the absence of any others. So that also includes what could have come up yesterday for the people from community scrutiny, because it includes support for all the area committees as well. But primarily it's about the community development work and the outreach and the asset-based community development that's going, and that now merged with public health outreach as well, yeah, since the previous change. So I'm concerned about the reduction of that. The usual provisos, we know some savings are going to add other costs elsewhere, and the community development work and the public health work are there designed to support people and to keep them healthy and active and involved in their communities and solving problems in their communities. So the cost implications of this is what I'm most worried about. But I suspect I can guess the answer. We've still got to look at the budget being cut. But what is the scale of the cut in terms of the total budget?
Thanks, Martin, and thanks for your support for all of that work, which is so unseen and yet so vitally important. Like many of these proposals, this is a least worst option. So what you see here is the remaining, there's one element of the general fund which remains, and that's the element which supports the not the neighbourhood partnerships, neighbourhood. So that has stayed in place. The £32,000, sorry, still in the general fund allocation for that, because that's statutory or it's core council business. This was the remaining general fund element. The rest of the team is funded by the public health grant, and unless or until that grant is cut, that work is therefore secure. And I make absolutely no apology at all for that being one of the major discretionary contributions that the grant makes. The other is to domestic abuse services, and the contribution of the grant, which you don't see as a cut. It comes from the grant and picks up general fund. These are two really important areas for us. So it's not something we would want to do. There are no redundancies involved. That's why we've done it. The posts are vacant, so we can do it without any pain. And we will be making the most of what we've got and looking to bring in whatever other resource we can. We've had quite a bit of money in for community development from the NHS around vaccine champions, COVID money. It's all short-term money, but wherever we can get it, we're bringing it in. And the service is also funded from the HRA, I should have said. So the community development service is now funded largely from HRA and mostly from the public health grant.
Could I just very quick follow-up? In terms, does that include support for social prescribing and things? Because that would that come from the NHS?
Well, interestingly, we used to. So the local authority used to fund social prescribing. In fact, we were one of the sort of best in class, first out of the tracks, as it were. But the NHS has picked up social prescribing. So there's a slight rebalancing in terms of where the resource is coming, and resource for social prescribing is coming into the NHS and going into practices or going into localities directly. Yep, so we support it, but we don't have to provide it. Yeah.
Zoe and then Tim.
Hiya. I thought I'd do P1, P5, P7 as a group. So Community Links, Redfield Lodge, Concord Lodge. On number Community Links, it was saying we'll continue to make efficiencies in the delivery of our service. And Redfield and Concord is to review and develop a more efficient and effective delivery models for both of those. Could you talk a little bit more about what the thoughts are, where you think there might be efficiencies in those, and also what, for the budget cuts that are proposed, what percentage of those are those to the overall budget for those elements? So, like, because £676,000 in the first year for Redfield Lodge, and we'd still need to go into further consultation for it, and 500,000 for the community link service as well. They sound large.
They sound large and they are expensive services. So I wouldn't, off the top of my head, be able to. I don't suppose anybody would actually hear this afternoon, but we can get that answer for you. I mean, the first thing to say is that you'd expect me to say this. Of course, we champion having in-house services, but in the situation that we're in, we've got to have a look at these. And the community link service. Well, all of those are non-statutory services, so we have got to have a good look at them. And community links, it's an excellent service for those people who use it, but the unit cost, because not that many people do, and actually after COVID, many of the people who, when they reopened, they'd found other day activities and so on, so the unit cost is high. So there are two ways that we can do this, aren't there? One of them is to bring down that unit cost by making those services or making other organisations able to use the facilities. And Brenda is very familiar with the one in North Bristol, used to be called Lanercost, so for those people who are familiar with those names. Making sure that those resources that are in there, which are fantastic, accessible resources, that's open to other organisations, and that will bring the costs down. And I'm always very aware that we need to make sure that if other day opportunities are given to those people, and these are people with very, very high level of needs, that their needs are being properly met, and that it isn't a service of poor quality. Redfield, I've always thought, it's the only home that the City Council still runs. When the council many years ago got rid of its other homes, that wasn't something that I or other Labour councillors at the time supported. But as we have got it, they're making best use of it, and we're talking to the hospitals about, again, these step-down beds and whether or not we could provide that in Redfield Lodge, because the hospitals are prepared to pay quite a lot of money. I come back to Stephen's earlier point about that the NHS does not have to balance its budget every year. It rolls over, overspends. That's familiarly what it does. And I'll remind you that the spend for the NHS, their side of the integrated care system in Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloucestershire, BNSSG, is £3 billion. So it does rather put into the shade what our budgets are. So whether there's use that the NHS can make of those beds, which would mean that would again make that a really, it could be a not just a cost saving, it could actually generate income for us. And also some of those most expensive places like the specialist dementia care, perhaps we should be the provider of that kind of support so that we're, rather than again finding expensive places. Concord, we've got some interesting and exciting conversations going on about that, which I don't think is appropriate to do in this meeting, but we can certainly have that conversation elsewhere. But again, I said this much earlier this afternoon, back in the midst of time, about the council tax reduction scheme, that if commissioners were to come in, the non-statutory services would go, and these it wouldn't be a managed decline, would it? It would be them saying, that's it, why are you doing this? So working with partner organisations, particularly the NHS, Sirona, the community services provider, to see if there's a better way of using those facilities is really top of my agenda. You will notice, I have to say this, you will notice that community meals is not on the list.
Can I just interrupt for one moment, because Stephen's going to have to go, and I didn't want him to go without just saying thank you, because Stephen, appreciate this is 2 days of taking a massive chunk out of your diary, and I'm sure on behalf of members, just appreciate the time you've spent and the contributions you've made. So thank you so much for that. But I was also going to come in, Helen, on a subject I've raised with you in the past in terms of provision. And I feel, and members, this is in respect of drop-in facilities for adults with learning difficulties, which are not fairly available in Bristol. And one of the issues, I think genuinely, is for those who are responsible for adults with learning difficulties is actually finding out what is available. There is quite a lot available, but finding it is often a challenge. But I've already made the point to you and Hugh that drop-in facilities can actually provide an easy means of, at a relatively low cost, of keeping contact and assessing needs. And it seems very strange that there is a drop-in facility at Patchway, but there isn't one within Bristol, because that then takes cost for getting to that, and it would be much better if it was in the community. So it is only a question still of, is there not a role for that maintenance, and also how it's promoted. So not just how do you find out that things are going on, but how is it promoted? Because do all those who could benefit from it know that it's there? So I know you've heard me say that before, but I can't let this chance go by not just putting it on record again.
And you know that I agree with you, and I've raised persistently, these people are fed up of me raising it, about an issue about a drop-in up at the park in Knoll West, and similarly making sure. And one of our colleagues, I won't name them by saying who, but in a lot of these discussions, and we've had, I'm sure you can see that this has been very, very difficult for cabinet members over the last 6 weeks or so while we've been doing this work. But one of our colleagues uses the expression about whack-a-mole, which is, you put something down there and it pops up over there. And I think that is a case in point, that keeping those people so that they've got some social activity, they've got a purpose on the day when they do a day activity, go to a drop-in or whatever, actually prevents costs for the person themselves potentially needing greater package of support, but also for their carers. And again, it's one of the things that we try to improve is about carers support, so that, you know, heaven help us if suddenly all of those people who are providing care for their family member turn up on the council house doorstep and say, I can't do it anymore. You know, the budget hole that we're seeing now would be many, many millions more, wouldn't it? So the point's taken. And there is some work going on around Well Aware, isn't there, and about the visibility of day services and support services and all of those things. And we also had some consultants in this year doing some work with us on learning disabilities and autism, and bringing some providers in who are active in other parts of the country and might not be here, and better local providers, just to make that a better and more joined up service.
Thank you. Tim? Oh, microphone.
Very quickly on 1, 5 and 7, sorry to labour a point, but there will be some reassessment capacity needed in that, going back to the cuts elsewhere. I'll just leave that hanging. I did just want to leave my kind of more generic point, which is a kind of, and I think it's come up about, you know, where between, in this case, we're just looking at children's and adults, but, you know, where should the cuts come? And I think both Heather and John have said some stuff around a lot of the children's ones, sorry to say it, but sound hopeful, whereas in adults there's some very tangible cuts. So we probably do need to really understand, just have a kind of a risk assessment of the delivery of these savings, which I'm sure Denise will provide us. The other thing is just like what we're doing about the social care precept, because I think people who pay council tax will expect fewer cuts to come and fall on adults. So Helen's shaking her head. I just want to put that in the air. That would be my expectation as a council taxpayer. And I don't know how that pans out, what our kind of actual legal responsibilities are about ring fencing that is, but I'd like to explore that a little bit. Helen's down to get in, but I'm kind of...
Well, if I give a comment for perhaps Helen or Denise to just, I think what you will find that the spending pressures in the care budget is such that it is still going up significantly, and this is therefore a contribution to reduce it. So, if you like, the social care precept will be being absorbed. It's just about 10% less than it needs to be to make a difference. Is that a reasonable interpretation of it?
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's going to make a bad situation slightly less worse, if that's English. So encourage all your friends and family to fill in the consultation and tick the box to say that we do need the social care precept. But, you know, that and the announcements in the autumn statement last week are not actually going to fill the gap that we've got.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's more on a selling it to the public kind of point of view.
You know, it's reasonable for people to think that if they tick that box and they are saying that they're prepared to pay it, that they could see that that money being evident, but actually it's just going to be filling that black hole a little bit more.
Anybody else want to make any last comment? In which case, again, Helen, Hugh, and all of you, thank you for your patience in waiting for us to get to you, but in responding to our questions. And I think, Helen, this is as I said to Craig earlier, this is something where, you know, it's not actually a scrutiny versus the executive member or the department. I think we understand the challenges and don't envy those challenges that you've all got to make in terms of how this is presented. So as yesterday, officers, can I thank you for your time, I hope we've asked you difficult enough questions for you to feel that we value your professionalism, but not so difficult that we've made it too uncomfortable for you. And Helen, thank you, and indeed Asha, for your contributions today. And members, I don't think I've ever been to a situation where we've had all cabinet members turn up to our scrutiny, which I think indicates possibly the seriousness of the situation and the fact that there is no animosity from scrutiny towards the challenges that are being faced. So I think that's really, really significant. So thank you all. Can I also thank Joe and Ian and Tom for their behind the scenes making all this work, because they have the added problem that they're not contributing and they have to stay alert to what's going on, which makes it even more demanding than it is for the rest of us. And members, I hope you found this process constructive, if not also exhausting. But can I just say thank you for the way everybody's entered into the spirit of this. Apart from, I think it was one outburst from Councillor Cheney, which was political, but was actually quite justified and entertaining. I think it's really positive that everyone's taken part in this with a real care about the situation and not actually about getting a party message across. And I think that, to me, is scrutiny in the light that it should be being carried on. So thank you all. I declare this meeting closed.
And can I thank you, Jeff, for an epic 6 hours of chairing over 2 days, which has been quite tough. Well done.